The world at the end of the Cretaceous was alive in a way that feels almost impossible to imagine today, lush, thunderous, radiant with species that ruled Earth for over 150 million years. Yet beneath this vibrant surface, an invisible countdown had already begun. The great age of dinosaurs was approaching its final moments, not with warnings or omens that any creature could understand, but with the quiet certainty of a cosmic event already in motion. This was a world on the edge of silence, though no inhabitants sensed the precipice beneath their feet. Forests stretched across continents like endless oceans of green, their canopies trembling with the footsteps of titanic herbivores and the fluttering wings of early birds. Rivers meandered through fertile plains where hadrosaurs grazed in herds, snorting softly as they communicated in low, resonant calls that echoed through the morning fog. High above, pterosaurs drifted on the rising thermals, their wings casting fleeting shadows over the prehistoric wetlands. The earth itself felt timeless, ancient rhythms repeating day after day, season after season, without hint of collapse. In these final days, the planet was warm, humid, and full of life. Vast inland seas split North America, jungles dominated South America, and the supercontinent was still slowly pulling itself apart. Volcanic regions simmered at their edges, releasing fumes into the sky and shaking distant ground. But these events had been happening for millennia. To the creatures who lived here, they were simply part of the world's eternal pulse. Nothing suggested that their dynasty was about to end. And so the dinosaurs woke each day with the same instinctive routines, seeking food, shelter, safety, and survival. A Tyrannosaurus trailed a herd of torosaurs through a dense conifer forest, each footstep muffled by decomposing needles carpeting the ground. Near the riverbank, a family of alamosaurs lumbered slowly toward a grove of cycads, their massive bodies swaying like living mountains. Smaller mammals scurried beneath ferns, avoiding the heavy tread of the giants above. Life thrived in the shadows as much as in the sun. This world was familiar in its patterns yet alien in its creatures. Cicada-like insects screamed from treetops. Giant horned dinosaurs sparred across open plains. Flowers bloomed in radiant clusters, scenting the air with sweetness that drifted for miles. Everything was intense, every color, every sound, every vibration in the ground. Earth was not quiet, it was symphonic, alive, and thoroughly unaware. But somewhere far beyond the blue sky, so far that no creature could dream of such distances, a small, rocky traveler was racing through the darkness. It had no intention, no malice, no awareness of life on the world it was hurtling toward. It simply followed a path set millions of years earlier, pushed by gravitational nudges and cosmic accidents. In the immense expanse of space, it was insignificant. On Earth, it would become the most significant object ever to fall from the heavens. Yet in this moment, nothing on Earth felt threatened. A thin mist hung over a swamp as early morning sunlight filtered through the trees. A group of small feathered dinosaurs hopped across mossy logs, chirping to one another as they hunted insects. A massive triceratops splashed through shallow water, shaking its frill and scattering droplets like crystals in the air. The planet seemed eternal, anchored in the rhythms of a world shaped by evolution rather than catastrophe. Even the atmosphere carried no hint of the impending calamity. Winds moved gently through fern fields, rustling their fronds like waves on a quiet sea. Clouds drifted lazily overhead. The air was warm, thick with pollen and the earthy scent of vegetation. To all creatures, this was another ordinary day, one of countless ordinary days that had shaped the long, unbroken reign of dinosaurs. But deep within Earth's crust, subtle tremors occasionally whispered through ancient rock. Volcanic fields in what is now India exhaled smoke in slow, rumbling pulses. Climate patterns were shifting ever so slightly, though still far from collapse. Environmental stresses existed, but they were the kind that life adapted to over centuries, not hours. The true ending would not come from these internal forces. It would arrive from above, without warning. As the sun climbed across the sky, the prehistoric world continued its dance. Predator and prey, hunter and hunted, each creature fulfilled its role in an ecosystem both brutal and beautiful. A flock of enantiornithine birds swooped over a clearing, their feathers shimmering in golden light. A lone dromaeosaur padded silently through the underbrush, its sickle claw raised instinctively from the ground. The forest floor vibrated with life, rustling leaves, dripping water, distant calls. These final peaceful hours carried a sense of timelessness, though time was slipping away faster than any creature could sense. None knew that the world above the sky was already changing. The asteroid had entered the inner solar system, accelerating with terrifying speed. Its surface was scarred from past collisions, its core was ancient and cold. It had journeyed for millions of years, unseen and unheard. And here on Earth, life continued in ignorance. A hadrosaur mother nudged her offspring away from a potential predator. A pack of smaller carnivores chased insects across a clearing. Dragonflies with wingspans larger than a human hand skimmed along the water's surface. The Earth was a masterpiece of diversity, painted over millions of years, and about to be erased in a geological instant. As evening approached, the forests glowed in the last warmth of the setting sun. Animals settled into their resting places. The inland sea reflected orange and red hues, glimmering as if aflame. The sky darkened and filled with stars, silent, distant witnesses to an unfolding tragedy. High above those glittering lights, the asteroid continued its descent. Earth spun beneath it, unaware. Life breathed and moved and sang, unaware. The final night of the dinosaur world had arrived, peaceful as any other. But dawn would bring fire. And in that fragile space between night and morning, the world balanced unknowingly on the edge of silence. The late Cretaceous sun hung heavy over the land, casting long golden beams across a world dominated by creatures of immense size and ancient lineage. These giants walked beneath its fading warmth with no knowledge that their age was slipping toward its final chapter. To them, this was simply another day, another cycle of feeding, fighting, migrating, and surviving in ecosystems that had been stable for millions of years. Yet for the viewer, these scenes are glimpses into the last vibrant breaths of a world nearing collapse. Across the floodplains, herds of hadrosaurs moved like living rivers. Their calls rose in rolling waves, deep and resonant, vibrating through the air as they communicated dangers, directions, and the rhythms of the herd. Their crests, whether hollow tubes, solid domes, or sweeping ornaments, served as natural instruments, filling the landscape with haunting, echoing sounds. They were the great grazers of their time, shaping entire ecosystems with the sheer force of their numbers. Nearby, ankylosaurs lumbered slowly, their armored backs reflecting sunlight like shields forged by nature. Their clubbed tails swung with deliberate weight, a reminder that even the slowest giants carried the means to defend themselves against the era's fiercest predators. Each step they took left impressions in the mud that would one day become fossils, silent testimonies of a world that once flourished. They browsed low vegetation, cracking branches and crushing ferns beneath their massive bodies as small mammals darted in and out of hiding spots at their feet. In the forests, smaller but equally fierce predators prowled the shadows. Dromaeosaurs, with their feathered limbs and razor-sharp claws, moved like flickering ghosts through dense underbrush. Their senses were attuned to every rustle of leaves, every tremor in the ground. They were swift, clever, and deadly in coordinated attacks. But even they knew to yield when a titan entered their domain. For dominating the land like nothing before or since was the tyrannosaur. With each thunderous step, vibrations rippled through the soil. Its senses were acute, hearing attuned to distant footsteps, smell powerful enough to detect faint traces of blood from miles away. Its presence redefined the landscape, forcing herbivores into tighter herds and driving smaller predators to the margins. Though massive and terrifying, the tyrannosaur was not the monster of nightmares but a creature perfectly adapted to its niche, shaped by millions of years of evolution to rule its world. Above, pterosaurs soared through open skies, some with wingspans rivaling small aircraft. They glided over coastlines and forests, scanning for fish, carrion, or opportunities in the bustling ecosystems below. Their shadows swept across the ground like silent omens, though no creature interpreted them that way. The sky was their domain, and they ruled it with grace and mastery. Yet despite the overwhelming power and abundance of these animals, there were subtle stresses rippling through the world beneath them. Temperatures fluctuated in ways unseen for centuries. Some regions experienced unusual dryness, others strange rainfall patterns. Volcanic fumes from distant lands occasionally shifted winds or tinted the sky in peculiar shades. None of these changes were catastrophic alone, but they hinted at instability brewing beneath the surface of normalcy. Plants responded in quiet ways, slight shifts in flowering seasons, changes in pollen distribution, minor adjustments in growth patterns. These signals went unnoticed by the giants who fed on them, who moved through their world guided by instinct rather than foresight. The environment was changing, but change was something life had always endured. Nothing suggested that the shifts were preludes to extinction. Still, nature continued to operate in balance. On the open plains, a pair of male ceratopsians clashed in a display of dominance. Their horns locked with bone-cracking force, dust rising around their massive forms as they struggled for territory or mating rights. Nearby, juveniles watched, learning the rituals that shaped their species' survival. When the older male pushed the younger down, the herd erupted in snorts and stomps, a thunderous approval of victory. In the coastal regions, the warm, shallow seas shimmered with life. Mosasaurs patrolled the waters, their enormous bodies slicing through waves with speed and grace. Schools of fish darted beneath their gaze, while ammonites drifted in spiraling shells below. Coral reefs thrived, painting the underwater world with colors that rivaled any tropical landscape today. Marine reptiles rose to the surface for air, their movements slow and deliberate beneath the blazing sun. But even these vibrant waters bore signs of subtle disruption. Some regions showed slight temperature drops, others mild changes in pH levels. These shifts were not yet catastrophic, but they hinted at an Earth in flux, a world slightly out of rhythm with its long-standing patterns. As the day progressed, the giants moved with purpose, shaped by the cycles of hunger and migration. A herd of titanosaurs, their necks swaying like massive cranes, trekked across a valley toward richer feeding grounds. Their long strides crushed vegetation beneath them, creating pathways that smaller animals used for safety. Their young walked in the center, guarded by adults whose sheer presence deterred most predators. Predators watched from a distance, calculating risk and opportunity. A lone tyrannosaur considered approaching the herd, but even its immense power faltered against the collective strength of the titanosaurs. Instead, it waited for a straggler, an injured individual, or a moment of vulnerability that nature often provided to patient hunters. As the sun dipped lower, casting the land in a warm orange glow, the world felt timeless and complete. Every creature, from massive herbivores to tiny lizards, existed in a network of relationships and instincts that had been refined by deep time. They did not know that an asteroid was racing toward them, growing larger in Earth's sky with every passing hour. They did not know that the balance they lived within, beautiful, brutal, and ancient, was about to unravel. For now, they moved beneath a dying sun, unaware that its warm, comforting light was illuminating the final days of their kind. The world was still alive with roars, wing beats, and thunderous footsteps. But the shadow of cosmic fate had already stretched across Earth, even if no eyes could see it yet. The morning mist clung to the ground like a pale veil as life stirred within the dense Cretaceous forest. Every breath of wind carried the scent of damp earth and crushed vegetation, signs of creatures moving long before the sun fully rose. Among the towering conifers and ferns, a young hadrosaur lowered its head to drink from a shallow pool. Its reflection rippled gently, an image of innocence in a world where survival was never guaranteed. Unbeknownst to it, unseen eyes were already watching, calculating, waiting for one perfect moment. In the shadows, a tyrannosaur crouched low, its massive form concealed by foliage thick enough to hide even a predator of its stature. Its nostrils flared, drawing in the faint smell of the hadrosaur herd nearby. Every heartbeat echoed with a deep, resonant power. It was hungry, its last hunt had been days ago, and hunger sharpened both its instincts and its resolve. The giant predator remained motionless, muscles coiled beneath its scaled skin, as it analyzed the herd's movements with a patience honed by countless generations of pursuit. The herd itself grazed peacefully, unaware that a silent shadow lurked just beyond the tree-line. Mothers nudged their young gently forward, encouraging them to feed on the tender shoots emerging between rocks. Older individuals inspected their surroundings with weary caution, occasionally lifting their heads to scan for dangers. But the forest was calm, birds called from branches, and no alarm ripple passed through the group's posture. Everything signaled safety, everything except the truth hidden in the undergrowth. The tyrannosaur's eyes narrowed as it identified its target, a subadult lagging just behind the main herd. Slightly weaker, slightly distracted, slightly isolated, the margins that defined life and death. The predator's breath steadied, its mind reducing the world to a single moment of violence waiting to unfold. In the theater of the Cretaceous, such hunts were not acts of malice but of necessity. Life fed on life, and each successful kill fueled another day in a world governed by natural law. A distant crack echoed through the trees, a fallen branch, perhaps struck by the wind or another animal. The hadrosaurs raised their heads instantly, ears swiveling and eyes wide. They paused, stiff and alert, searching for the source of the sound. For a moment, time slowed. Even the forest felt suspended, every leaf still and waiting. The tyrannosaur felt the shift, sensed the heightened awareness, and remained perfectly still. It knew patience, knew when to strike and when to wait. A failed attempt meant wasted energy and possible injury. It would not risk that unless the moment was absolute. Slowly, dangerously slowly, the herd resumed feeding. Their posture softened, their caution waned. The window of opportunity returned. The tyrannosaur shifted its weight, barely disturbing the ground beneath its feet. Its massive tail balanced its forward lean as it readied its sprint. In that instant, the forest seemed to inhale, and then the predator exploded into motion. Trees whipped past as the tyrannosaur surged from its concealment with terrifying speed. The ground shook with each thunderous stride. Birds scattered into the sky in panic. The hadrosaurs froze for a split second, paralyzed by shock, before instinct took over. The herd bolted, their calls erupting into a chaotic chorus as they scrambled to escape. But the targeted subadult stumbled, losing precious seconds that it could not afford. The tyrannosaur closed the distance rapidly, its jaws open, revealing serrated teeth glistening in the morning light. The chase was brutal and short. As the hadrosaur struggled to regain balance, the predator lunged forward, clamping its jaws around the herbivore's flank with bone-crushing force. A cry of agony tore through the air. The weight of the tyrannosaur dragged its prey down, kicking up dirt and leaves as both animals tumbled to the ground. The predator tightened its grip, shaking its head with violent power to tear through muscle and sinew. The hadrosaur's limbs thrashed desperately, but the struggle faded quickly as shock overtook its body. Within moments, the forest fell quiet again except for the heavy breathing of the tyrannosaur as it secured its meal. Around the kill site, the forest reacted with wary distance. Smaller scavengers, sensing opportunity, lingered at the edges, troodontids with sharp eyes, early birds fluttering nervously, insects already beginning their opportunistic swarms. But none dared approach while the tyrannosaur fed. It tore through flesh with practiced efficiency, each bite sustaining the cycle that had defined its species for millions of years. Yet even in this moment of primal triumph, the world felt strangely fragile, as though some deeper shift lay beneath the surface of the forest floor. The air carried a faint heaviness, a stillness that seemed unnatural, even in the aftermath of a hunt. The tyrannosaur paused briefly, lifting its head as though listening to something beyond the normal soundscape of its domain. But there was nothing unusual to hear. The distant rumble was nothing more than volcanic activity far from this region, common and unthreatening. Still, a subtle sense of imbalance lingered, unnoticed by the creatures who lived entirely within the boundaries of their instincts. The tyrannosaur lowered its head again and continued feeding, unaware that it was among the final generations of its kind that would ever walk the planet. As the hours passed, the forest regained its rhythm. The herd regrouped at a safe distance, mourning in the only way animals can, through heightened vigilance and strengthened bonds. Predators had always been part of their world. They would continue moving, continue feeding, continue birthing new generations. Life went on, because life had no concept of endings. The tyrannosaur finished its meal, leaving scraps for the scavengers who cautiously approached once the giant moved away. Troodontids darted forward, their calls sharp and excited as they tore into the leftovers. Insects swarmed the blood-soaked ground. A pair of smaller carnivores circled from the shadows, waiting for their turn. It was a ritual repeated countless times across the ages: predation, death, feeding, renewal. But here, in the quiet aftermath of the hunt, something felt different. Not to the animals, who sensed nothing amiss, but to us, with knowledge of what their world was about to lose. This was not just another hunt. It was one of the last hunts. A scene of instinct and survival, unfolding in a world that had no idea it was nearing its final chapter. A world that believed it still had millions of tomorrows, unaware that an unstoppable force was already racing toward it through the dark void of space. Far beyond the blue skies of Earth, in the cold and silent vastness of space, a lonely traveler drifted through darkness. It had no light of its own, no voice, no intention. It was simply a fragment of ancient cosmic violence, a shard of rock and metal forged in the early chaos of the solar system. For millions of years, it wandered aimlessly through the void, passing dead moons, silent comets, and distant stars that never noticed its presence. It was nothing more than debris. Yet fate had designated it as the bringer of an ending. This asteroid began its journey long before the age of dinosaurs even existed. It was older than Earth's first forests, older than the oceans, older than life itself. Born from the collisions of primordial bodies, it had once been part of something larger, perhaps a planetoid shattered by gravitational forces, perhaps a rogue fragment from the forming asteroid belt. Its history was written in scars carved across its surface, deep wounds that told stories no living creature would ever understand. It had drifted for eons, pushed and pulled by solar winds and distant gravitational nudges, until one subtle shift altered its destiny forever. A slight gravitational interaction with a larger body sent it onto a new path, a path that slowly, invisibly curved toward a pale blue planet far away. Tiny changes accumulated over millennia, each one guiding it closer. The asteroid knew nothing of these forces, it simply moved where physics demanded. It did not care. It could not. But its approach would redefine life on Earth. From a distance, Earth looked peaceful, a glowing sphere of oceans, clouds, and continents teeming with creatures who believed the world belonged to them. The late Cretaceous sun lit the planet beautifully, highlighting vast forests and inland seas that shimmered beneath its warmth. But the asteroid carried no appreciation for beauty. It only followed momentum, silent and inevitable. As it drifted into the inner solar system, the asteroid accelerated. The sun's gravity pulled it forward, speeding it up like a stone slingshot around a star. Its once cold surface warmed slightly, though the rock itself remained lifeless, an object of pure destruction masked by stillness. For the first time in millions of years, its trajectory intersected perfectly with Earth's orbit. Both bodies were now on a collision course neither could avoid. Back on Earth, nothing hinted at the approaching threat. The sky was clear. Winds whispered through forests. Animals moved through their routines, unaware that something bright and deadly was slowly becoming visible beyond the atmosphere. If any creature happened to look up at just the right moment, perhaps a pterosaur gliding high above the clouds, it might have noticed a tiny glimmer, a faint spark against the morning light. But it would have seemed no different from a distant star or a harmless fragment burning through the upper sky. Nothing about the tiny point of brightness could reveal its true nature. The asteroid entered Earth's gravitational influence, its speed climbing to tens of thousands of miles per hour. The atmosphere ahead waited like an invisible barrier, ready to ignite the object in a brilliant flash. But even that infernal display would be too late. Its energy, the sheer, unimaginable power locked within its velocity, was enough to end an era. As it traveled closer, its shadow stretched across space, though no living eyes could see it. The silence of the void accompanied it, broken only by the faint hum of solar radiation. The asteroid spun slowly, revealing craters and jagged edges formed by ancient impacts. Each rotation brought it closer to the moment when its long journey would end in an explosion brighter than the sun. Its size, roughly 10 kilometers across, was small by cosmic standards, insignificant against planets and stars. Yet its kinetic energy was beyond anything Earth had ever experienced. It carried the force of billions of nuclear bombs compressed into a single strike. And it was aimed at a thriving world that had no defenses, no warning systems, no concept of cosmic danger. Below, Earth's magnetic field shimmered softly, oblivious to the intruder hurtling toward it. Clouds drifted peacefully over vast continents. Storms brewed over oceans. Rivers carved their paths through forests where dinosaurs fed, hunted, and raised their young. Life continued without pause. To every creature, the universe seemed calm, consistent, eternal. But the asteroid had already crossed the final threshold. It was now close enough that Earth's gravity locked onto it completely, pulling it in with unbreakable force. There was no turning back. It entered the upper atmosphere in a split second of fiery brilliance, though this moment belongs to the next chapter of the story. For now, in the cold abyss, the final seconds of its cosmic journey ticked away like the last grains of sand in an ancient hourglass. Light blazed around it as friction ignited its surface, turning the once dark rock into a blazing spear aimed directly at the Yucatán Peninsula. It heated to thousands of degrees within moments, leaving behind a tail of vaporized stone. The sound of its descent would have been deafening, but sound could not follow it through space. Silence remained its companion until the very last instant. The dinosaurs below sensed nothing. No tremor, no omen, no shift in the wind suggested the sky was about to fall. The world had endured countless challenges, storms, volcanoes, predators, and survived them all. To the creatures living beneath the sun, life felt endless. But the visitor from the abyss was nearly here. After billions of years drifting between stars, it had found its destination. Not by intent, not by design, but by the cold mathematics of the universe. And within moments, its arrival would sweep away the ancient order of life on Earth and clear the path for a new world yet to come. The final morning of the dinosaur world began like countless mornings before it, quiet, golden, and utterly unaware of the catastrophe racing toward it from the sky. Dawn spread across the horizon in soft hues, brushing treetops, rippling across rivers, and warming the backs of creatures who stirred with sleepy instinct. This would be the last sunrise they would ever see, yet nothing in the natural world hinted at the gravity of the hour. Life moved with the same rhythms it had followed for millions of years, peaceful and eternal in appearance, even as minutes ticked down toward oblivion. In the dense forests of what is now North America, beams of early sunlight pierced the canopy, revealing clouds of insects dancing like drifting sparks. Hadrosaur herds emerged from their nighttime shelters, shaking dew from their crests, exhaling warm steam into the cool morning air. Their young nudged at their sides, eager for breakfast, unaware of the countless dangers that usually filled their days. Today, those dangers, predators, storms, territorial skirmishes, seemed distant compared to the silent threat streaking toward Earth at incomprehensible speed. Nearby, ceratopsians pawed at the ground in search of fresh plants, their horns glinting faintly in the new light. Their movements were slow and deliberate, a sign of stability in a world that still seemed full of promise. Tiny mammals darted between ferns and roots, collecting seeds and insects with the same cautious routines they had always relied on. Bird-like dinosaurs took to the branches, preening their feathers, calling to one another in sharp, melodic bursts. Every corner of the forest hummed with life. Across the plains, predators also began their morning rituals. A pair of dromaeosaurs stalked the edges of a clearing, communicating in soft clicks as they scanned for prey. Their feathers caught the light in iridescent flashes, giving them an almost ethereal appearance. They moved with the confidence of creatures who understood their role in the world, hunters who kept the balance intact. In the distance, the low rumble of a massive herbivore signaled that titanosaurs were also beginning their day, their long necks rising above the trees like ancient sculptures stretching toward the sky. Farther south, near the coastlines, the inland seas shimmered with early light. Pterosaurs lifted from their rocky perches, flapping in slow, rhythmic strokes before gliding effortlessly over the water. Their shadows rippled across the surface as fish stirred below, reflecting the lively choreography that had existed between predator and prey for millions of years. In the deeper waters, mosasaurs patrolled the currents, their sleek bodies cutting through waves with practiced ease. Everything about this morning felt ordinary, familiar, serene. The air was thick with scents of blooming plants, moist earth, and the lingering remnants of the night's coolness. A gentle breeze swept across the land, carrying pollen, spores, and the faint rumble of distant herds. The world seemed calm, abundant, and eternal. But subtle anomalies had begun to ripple through the environment, too faint for animals to comprehend. The sky held a slight haze, invisible to prehistoric eyes but noticeable to ours. Atmospheric pressure dipped ever so slightly. Birds flew at unusual angles as if sensing something intangible, though they quickly settled back into routine. These tiny disturbances were the only whisper of the disaster moments away. As morning progressed, various ecosystems went about their normal rhythms. In the swamps, giant turtles basked on muddy banks, soaking in the sun's warmth. Insects clattered in rhythmic waves among reeds taller than a human. Crocodilians lurked beneath the surface, their eyes breaking the waterline as they waited patiently for prey. Life thrived here too, in its own quiet, methodical way. In volcanic regions farther across the globe, the ground trembled occasionally, nothing unusual for such areas. Lava oozed from fractures, and smoke plumed into the air. These eruptions had been shaping landscapes long before this day and would continue to do so long after. Dinosaurs living nearby barely reacted, the occasional ashfall had always been part of their world. If anything, the volcanic haze sometimes brought cooler breezes, temporary relief from the heat. Back in the forests, a group of juvenile triceratops chased one another clumsily through tall grasses. Their playful calls echoed as adults watched protectively. The simple joys of their existence were timeless and pure, untouched by any awareness of the cosmic threat drawing near. In another clearing, a family of alamosaurs made their way toward a grove of cycads, their massive feet leaving deep impressions that would someday fossilize into silent marks of a vanished world. Everything looked exactly as it always had, but the clock was ticking. High above the atmosphere, the asteroid had already crossed the invisible boundary where Earth's pull became irresistible. To any creature capable of looking directly upward, its brightness might have seemed unusual, like a strange star that hadn't been there before. But no dinosaur, no bird, no mammal understood celestial omens. The sky was simply the sky. As the sun climbed higher, heat spread across the landscape. Lizards basked on rocks. Dragonflies darted across ponds. Forests swayed under the growing warmth. The world was not in danger, at least, not in any way the creatures could sense. Their instincts were shaped for predators, competition, climate, hunger, not for asteroids. Still, a slight shift in the wind carried an odd dryness. Leaves trembled though no predator approached. Somewhere in the distance, a flock of birds abruptly took flight for no clear reason. Stress signals spread subtly through the environment, but their meaning was lost to the animals living within it. Even predators sensed something indistinct. A lone tyrannosaur paused while drinking from a river, lifting its head to sniff the air. It detected no prey, no threat, no change worth reacting to. Still, it hesitated. A quiet unease lingered, animal intuition detecting something too great to understand. Within moments, the feeling passed, and it returned to its routine, shaking off the tension like water droplets from its jaw. This was the last normal morning. The final peaceful breaths of a world unaware of its fate. Above the sky, invisible from the ground, the asteroid blazed brighter and larger, its descent accelerating into its final path. But the dinosaurs continued to graze. The pterosaurs continued to glide. The mammals continued to hide. The seas continued to shimmer under the light. Life moved forward, unaware that in just a short while, less than the length of a day, everything would change. The final minute before impact began with a subtle shift in the sky, so subtle that almost no creature noticed. High above the Earth, the asteroid had transformed from a distant speck of light into a blazing, roaring inferno tearing through the atmosphere at unimaginable speed. Its descent created a shockwave ahead of it, an invisible wall of compressed air racing downward faster than sound. The world below, however, carried on with the illusion of normalcy. To most animals, this was just another moment in a long, familiar day. But some instincts stirred. As the asteroid pushed deeper into the atmosphere, the air around it superheated to thousands of degrees, creating a glowing trail across the heavens. A few pterosaurs flying at high altitudes were the first to sense something wrong. They cried out sharply, wings flaring as turbulence rocked them violently. Some struggled to stay upright as the shock front approached. Their alarm calls echoed downward, a chorus of fear that grounded creatures could neither see nor understand. On the forest floors far below, animals paused mid-step as a faint tremor disturbed the ground. It wasn't the deep rumble of distant thunder or the shifting of tectonic plates, it was sharper, quicker, and alien. Insects fell silent. Birds froze momentarily. Herbivores lifted their heads in unison, ears twitching toward the horizon. Something unfamiliar rippled through the air, too faint to be recognized but strong enough to stir unease. The sky brightened unnaturally. A strange light shimmered across the treetops, growing rapidly in intensity. Shadows stretched and warped. Creatures blinked, confused. It wasn't the warm glow of the sun or the cold gleam of the moon, it was something far too intense. A few dinosaurs let out soft alarm calls. Some herds tightened instinctively, forming protective circles around their young. Predators paused mid-stride, sensing a disturbance greater than any they were adapted to confront. 40 seconds to impact. The asteroid now glowed brighter than the sun itself. Its fiery halo expanded, leaving a trail of plasma and vaporized stone streaking behind it like the tail of a newly born star. The air ahead of it ionized, creating a cascade of colors that flickered through the sky in surreal patterns. But beauty meant nothing here. This was the light of destruction. Sound had not yet caught up with the spectacle. The ground was still quiet, giving the illusion that nothing catastrophic was happening. But creatures with strong senses, tyrannosaurs, sensitive to infrasound, and certain birds with acute vision, felt the world changing in ways no instinct had prepared them for. A deep unease pulsed through the forests, plains, and coastlines. 30 seconds to impact. A strange wind began to blow, not from the ocean, not from storms, but sucked toward the incoming asteroid as it displaced massive volumes of air. Leaves swirled unnaturally. Water in ponds rippled even without a breeze. Small dinosaurs chirped in distress, unable to interpret what was happening. Mothers herded their young closer. Predators abandoned stealth, overwhelmed by confusion. Creatures looked skyward, reacting to a brightness that stung their eyes and seared their instincts with fear. 20 seconds. Now the first thunderous roar reached the surface, a low, growing rumble that shook leaves, rattled stones, and vibrated through the ribcages of every creature alive. Birds fled the treetops in panicked flocks. Herds stampeded chaotically, not knowing the direction of safety. The air tasted metallic. The pressure shifted abruptly, causing widespread discomfort and agitation. Dinosaurs bellowed in alarm, not at an enemy they could see, but at a force they could not comprehend. 15 seconds. The asteroid descended into the lower atmosphere, its speed exceeding 20 kilometers per second. Its brightness lit the landscape like a rising second sun. Shadows stretched across valleys. Forests glowed unnaturally. The noise became deafening, a tearing, roaring, sky-splitting scream as the atmosphere itself tried to resist the intruder. Creatures collapsed in fear, their senses overwhelmed. Others ran until exhaustion overtook them. The natural order dissolved into pure chaos. Survival instincts offered no guidance. 10 seconds. The shockwave preceding the asteroid slammed into the surface before the rock itself arrived. Trees bent violently. Loose vegetation ripped from the ground. Birds were thrown from the air. Smaller animals were knocked off their feet. The world shook. Water sloshed violently in lakes and rivers. Dust filled the air. The sky no longer looked like the sky, it was a burning, roaring curtain of light. 5 seconds. The point of impact, what is now the Yucatán Peninsula, glowed with a blinding white radiance as the asteroid hurtled toward it. The heat ahead of it was already intense enough to ignite vegetation before the rock even struck land. Animals within miles were instantly blinded, their final moments consumed by a fiery glare that swallowed all detail. 3 seconds. The asteroid descended below cloud level. The clouds themselves vaporized instantly. 2 seconds. The ground shook violently, a final warning that came too late. 1 second. The world stood still, breathless, burning, frozen in terror. Then everything changed. The moment of impact arrived in a burst of energy so immense that no creature on Earth, nor any imagination in the present day, could fully comprehend it. In the final fraction of a second before the asteroid touched the ground, the world beneath it glowed white-hot, the atmosphere ignited, and the air itself seemed to evaporate. The asteroid, nearly 10 kilometers wide, slammed into what is now the Yucatán Peninsula with a force greater than billions of nuclear bombs combined. In a single instant, the age of dinosaurs began its violent collapse. The rock hit Earth at more than 20 kilometers per second. Upon contact, it didn't simply strike the ground, it vaporized it. The crust beneath the asteroid's point of impact was converted into molten fire in the blink of an eye. Mountains of stone, sand, and ancient seabed were transformed into plasma hotter than the surface of the sun. The impact created a flash visible across the entire hemisphere, an explosion that outshone the brightest lightning, eclipsed the noonday sun, and carved a wound into the planet that would scar it forever. For animals within 1,000 kilometers, there was no awareness, no time to react. The blast killed them before their brains could even register pain. Everything within the immediate radius was obliterated: dinosaurs, plants, lakes, forests, entire ecosystems erased faster than the beat of a hummingbird's wing. The impact released so much heat that rocks near the site didn't just melt, they vaporized. The ocean around the strike zone boiled instantly, erupting upward in columns of steam that fused with molten debris. The shockwave expanded outward like a cosmic hammer. It hit the surrounding land with unimaginable force, flattening forests, shredding plant life, and sending massive animals tumbling like twigs in a hurricane. Creatures hundreds of kilometers away were thrown to the ground. Bones snapped. Air was ripped from lungs. Nothing in the impact zone resembled life anymore, it was all fire, ash, and blinding light. A crater more than 150 kilometers wide opened in seconds. Molten rock splashed upward like a fiery fountain, forming a temporary mountain higher than Everest before collapsing in on itself. The Earth's crust rebounded violently, creating rings of shattered rock that shot upward, only to fall back again in molten avalanches. The sky turned into a swirling vortex of fire and debris. The ground around the crater liquefied, churning with molten material in a chaotic, boiling sea of destruction. For animals farther away, hundreds, even thousands of kilometers, the horror unfolded more slowly. They saw a flash of light brighter than anything in nature, followed by a wave of searing heat that ignited forests instantly. Leaves burst into flames. Resin inside conifer trees exploded. Grasslands became infernos. Birds fell from the sky as the air around them superheated. Animals screamed and stampeded, their instincts overwhelmed by forces they could not understand. The heat pulse spread across continents. Even regions thousands of kilometers from the impact experienced temperatures high enough to start wildfires. Night and day blurred as the sky brightened unnaturally, glowing with a fiery haze that cast shadows in every direction. For a brief moment, it looked as though the world had been set aflame. And then came the sound. The shockwave, traveling slower than the flash and heat, finally reached distant lands. It roared like the sky itself had cracked open. Trees splintered into shards. Rivers heaved from their beds. Animals were torn from their feet. The noise rolled across Earth, a sound so powerful it shook mountains and shattered eardrums. In some places, it triggered earthquakes. In others, it triggered landslides. The planet groaned under the weight of the violence inflicted upon it. Enormous tsunamis formed in the oceans, but their journey belonged to another chapter. Right now, the focus was on the violence above land and sea. The atmosphere filled with a storm of debris, glass-like spherules, molten droplets, superheated dust. These materials were propelled high into the upper layers of the sky, some escaping Earth entirely, others circling the globe before cooling and falling like deadly rain. Animals in distant environments reacted instinctively. Herds of hadrosaurs stampeded blindly, calling to one another in fear. Triceratops bellowed, scrambling to protect their young as trees ignited around them. Raptors dashed through brush, looking for shelter but finding none. Even massive titanosaurs moved at frantic speeds, shaking the earth beneath their strides as they sought escape routes that did not exist. Creatures underwater felt the shockwave too. Lakes churned violently, killing fish and aquatic reptiles instantly. Riverbanks collapsed. Plesiosaurs and turtles writhed beneath the sudden changes in pressure, stunned by the violence carried through the water. Ecosystems that had existed for millions of years were thrown into chaos in mere moments. As the fireball grew, the sky filled with smoke and ash. The once clear atmosphere became a swirling cauldron of burning debris. Lightning formed inside the towering clouds of vaporized rock, illuminating the sky with jagged streaks of white-blue electricity. Thunder rolled endlessly as the atmosphere convulsed. No creature had ever experienced storms like this. No creature ever would again. And still, the effect spread outward. The blast wave carried winds faster than any hurricane known today. These winds uprooted ancient trees, hurled giant ferns across fields, and tore apart animals unlucky enough to be exposed. Forests were flattened. Valleys filled with ash. Cliffs crumbled. The world's surface buckled from the seismic shock, creating fissures that swallowed plants and creatures whole. In some regions, the ground cracked open and released toxic gases from deep underground. In others, the shaking ignited peatlands that smoldered for weeks. Everywhere, chaos replaced stability. What had been a lush, thriving world only minutes earlier was now a landscape of fire and ruin. But destruction alone did not define this moment. The impact initiated atmospheric changes that would shape the aftermath of extinction. The colossal plume of debris shot into the upper atmosphere, temporarily blocking sunlight and creating temperatures that would soon plunge. Tiny glass spherules rained back down, heating the air again and igniting secondary fires across continents. Ash began to drift like snow. Darkness began to form. Those few creatures that survived the first wave of destruction did so by chance. Some hid in burrows. Some took shelter underground or underwater. some simply happened to be far enough away. But survival was only the beginning of a struggle that would last not minutes, but months and years. The strike that shook the world had done more than destroy, it had changed the future of life forever. In that single, unfathomable moment, the dominance of the dinosaurs ended, and the Earth was set on a new path that would eventually lead to the rise of mammals, primates, and ultimately, humanity. But before any rebirth could come, the world had to descend into a nightmarish age of firestorms, tsunamis, and darkness. The impact was the opening blow. The true extinction had only just begun. The world immediately following the impact was unrecognizable, a realm where the very laws of nature seemed to twist under the weight of unimaginable violence. The first 10 minutes after the asteroid struck were a descent into chaos so profound that even the strongest, most resilient creatures had no frame of instinct or experience to guide them. What had begun as a single collision now unfolded into a chain reaction of destruction that ripple spread across the globe faster than thought, faster than sound, faster than fear. In the moments after impact, the fireball expanded outward in a blinding eruption. What had been forest, coastline, and shallow sea was replaced by a roaring dome of incandescent plasma. The rock vapor cloud shot into the atmosphere with speeds that rivaled the asteroid itself. Everything within a huge radius was gone, vaporized into nothingness. Mountains melted like candles in a furnace. Stone became airborne liquid. The very surface of the earth boiled. The shockwave rushed outward next, not gently, not gradually, but with the fury of explosive force multiplied beyond imagination. It ripped across the land, flattening every standing tree within hundreds of kilometers. The forests fell like dominoes under the weight of the blast, collapsing in all directions. Animals that survived the initial flash were thrown violently, crushed beneath fallen trunks or shredded by flying debris. The ground heaved beneath them as though the planet were trying to shake them loose. Birds in distant skies attempted to flee, but the atmospheric tides tossed them helplessly. Pterosaurs gliding miles away were flipped instantly, their wings tearing in the violent turbulence before they plummeted toward the ground. Smaller creatures hiding under foliage were buried or suffocated as the force compressed air pockets into crushing blasts. The very air became a weapon. Then came the heat wave. Superheated air, hotter than molten metal, raced outward at staggering speed. It didn't just warm the world, it ignited it. Forests that had already been knocked flat now burst into flames all at once, as though the planet's skin had been set ablaze. Dry vegetation vaporized instantly. Resinous conifers exploded. Animals caught in the blast were flash-burned before they could run or even understand what was happening. Within minutes, the heat reached places far from the crater. In regions thousands of kilometers away, creatures felt a sudden rise in temperature, a wave so intense that it burned skin, scorched feathers, and sent entire ecosystems into panic. Dinosaurs in distant valleys cried out, shaking their heads violently as the air dried their eyes and singed their scales. Water sources warmed rapidly, sometimes to boiling. Above all this, the sky became a churning nightmare. A towering column of smoke, dust, and molten debris shot straight into the atmosphere, a plume large enough to pierce the stratosphere. Lightning arced through the roiling cloud, illuminating it in eerie flashes of blue and white. The sound of the storm was endless, a deep, rolling rumble that echoed across entire continents. Even creatures living on the far side of the planet felt distant tremors, unaware of the source but instinctively afraid. The ocean reacted violently as well. The impact displaced so much water that tsunamis began forming immediately. Walls of water surged outward from the blast zone, racing across seas at speeds faster than any animal could swim. As these waves moved, they dragged sediment, coral, marine creatures, and debris with them. Coastal dinosaurs were swept into churning floods. Fish and marine reptiles found themselves hurled into unfamiliar waters. The sea became an engine of destruction, preparing to deliver its own deadly message to every shoreline in its path. On land far from the crater, the environment was changing at a pace that defied comprehension. Ash and debris began falling like black snow. First large chunks, hot, glassy fragments of rock called tektites, rained down, punching holes in leaves, smashing through the shells of smaller animals, embedding themselves into the soil like bullets. Then came the finer particles, drifting downward in a steady haze that darkened the sky. The sun took on a sickly, reddish hue. Light dimmed. Survivors, daunted, wounded, terrified, stumbled through landscapes already smoldering. A triceratops herd ran through a clearing, their calls desperate as embers landed on their backs. A lone tyrannosaur, normally proud and dominating, shook its head violently as smoke stung its eyes and throat. Raptors darted in panic, their movements chaotic, losing all coordination as the world burned around them. Many creatures instinctively sought water. Rivers and lakes filled with fleeing animals, ankylosaurs trudging into deeper waters, small mammals clinging to logs, giant turtles sinking beneath the surface. But even these refuges offered no safety. Ash quickly coated the water in dark layers. Some lakes heated to dangerous temperatures. Fish floated to the surface, lifeless. Crocodilians sank below, overwhelmed by debris and heat. Underground, small mammals huddled in burrows, trembling as the earth shook from aftershocks. The temperature rose steadily in these confined spaces, forcing them to dig deeper or suffocate. Insects scrambled deeper into soil layers, seeking cooler pockets of earth. Some would survive these early minutes through luck alone, protected by randomness rather than strength. In the skies, global winds shifted dramatically. The plume of debris lofted into the upper atmosphere began spreading outward like ink in water. Within minutes, it expanded across thousands of kilometers. Tiny glass particles, created from vaporized sand, began falling back to Earth at blistering speeds. These spherules heated the atmosphere again, causing a second wave of global fires. Embers floated over forests that had survived the first blast and ignited them anew. Animals fled repeatedly from one inferno into another. The first 10 minutes transformed the world absolutely. Landscapes that had thrived for millions of years were gone. Forests that had stood since the Jurassic period were flattened or burning. Rivers carved new paths as their banks collapsed. Oceans churned with dead creatures and floating debris. Air thickened with soot. The dinosaurs had endured droughts, ice ages, volcanic winters, predators, disease, and shifting continents. But nothing had prepared them for this. No instinct existed for cosmic catastrophe. No behavior could save them from the sequence of destruction already unfolding. The impact was over, but the extinction had only begun. And as the 10th minute passed, the world stumbled into the next phase of disaster, one defined not by a single blow, but by the cascading consequences that would unravel ecosystems, darken skies, freeze landscapes, and crush the age of giants forever. The world had barely begun to comprehend the destruction unleashed by the impact when a new and equally terrifying phase of the catastrophe unfolded above it. The sky, once blue and peaceful, transformed into a furnace. Millions upon millions of glowing droplets, tiny beads of glass created from vaporized rock, began to fall back through the atmosphere. These molten fragments, known today as tektites, re-entered Earth's skies at incredible speeds, heating the air around them to blistering temperatures. What followed was not just rainfall, but a global storm of fire. At first, the tektites appeared as streaks, shooting stars cascading across the heavens in numbers no creature had ever witnessed. Even the most distant lands, untouched by the initial explosion, saw the night sky blaze with light. Birds and pterosaurs cried out in confusion as they flew beneath a heaven streaked with burning trails. Many creatures paused, gazing upward with instinct screaming, unable to make sense of the glowing storm above them. But the spectacle hid a deadly truth. Each piece of molten debris generated intense heat as it plummeted toward Earth. Individually, they were tiny, no larger than grains of sand or pebbles, but collectively, they created a blanket of radiant energy that began to superheat the lower atmosphere. Temperatures surged rapidly, climbing far beyond what Earth's living creatures could endure. Across continents, forests that had survived the initial shock now faced a new, relentless assault. Leaves curled and withered in minutes. Bark cracked and smoldered. Grasses ignited spontaneously. One spark was enough to light a patch of dry vegetation, but this was not one spark, it was millions. The entire sky was a source of heat, radiating downward in a suffocating wave. The fires that erupted were not isolated events, they merged into continent-spanning infernos. In the plains, herds of herbivorous dinosaurs ran in frantic stampedes, their roars echoing across landscapes consumed by flames. Mothers pushed their offspring forward, legs trembling with exhaustion and fear, as smoke thickened the air. Titanosaurs crashed through burning forests, their massive bodies unable to outrun the tide of fire sweeping in all directions. Smaller dinosaurs sprinted desperately toward rivers or lakes, but even these sanctuaries grew hot as the surface water began to warm from above. High in the sky, pterosaurs found themselves trapped. Some attempted to fly above the smoke, only to feel the searing heat tearing at their wings. Others descended toward the ground, but the fires below left no safe landing. The air they depended upon betrayed them, rising thermals from the flames slammed them upward or pushed them into chaos. Exhausted and disoriented, many fell from the sky, struck down by heat and smoke rather than predators. In the oceans, the upper layers of water absorbed radiant heat and warmed rapidly. Marine reptiles swam deeper, seeking refuge from the increasing temperatures. Fish scattered, forming swirling masses below the hot surface. Coral reefs, exposed to warming waters and rainstorms of acidic debris, began to bleach and die. Even the deep ocean felt the pressure as surface waters churned violently from temperature shock. On land, the fires grew into devastating firestorms, massive systems feeding themselves on vast supplies of dry vegetation. These infernos generated winds that rivaled hurricanes, drawing oxygen from miles away. Flames leapt from treetop to treetop. Columns of smoke rose into the sky, further darkening the sunlight that still fought to penetrate the polluted air. The smell of burning life, plants, animals, forests, choked the atmosphere. Creatures sought any shelter they could find. Ankylosaurs crouched under rocky overhangs, their armor plates glowing faintly as ash rained down. Small mammals retreated into their burrows, blocking entrances with soil to keep out smoke and heat. Reptiles slithered deep into crevices. Some birds tried hiding beneath fallen logs or inside tree hollows, but these shelters quickly proved fatal as their surroundings caught fire. But not all areas burned evenly. Some wetlands, dense swamps, and river valleys created pockets of refuge where fire could not fully penetrate. Animals flooded into these areas in massive numbers, forming mixed groups of species that rarely shared space otherwise. Predators ignored prey. Herbivores paid no mind to territorial boundaries. In the face of apocalypse, instinctual roles broke down, survival became the only law. Even so, safety was temporary. The radiant heat continued for hours as the Tektite storm raged on. The sky glowed orange and red, pulsating like a dying ember. Ash drifted downward in thick sheets. Some animals died simply from overheating or smoke inhalation long before flames reached them. Others collapsed from exhaustion while trying to flee the spreading infernos. Farther from the impact site, the falling debris created different patterns of destruction. In some regions, tektites fell more lightly, sparing forests from immediate ignition but still heating the ground enough to scorch vegetation. Animals here experienced confusion and disorientation. The sky shimmered like a dome of fire. Strange winds whipped through trees. Roars of distant fires echoed across valleys even where flames had not yet arrived. A few lucky creatures, sheltered by geology or sheer coincidence, found themselves under rock ledges, inside deep caves, or hidden by waterlogged terrain that prevented fires from reaching them. These chance survivors would later become the ancestors of many lineages that rebuilt the post-impact world. But in these moments, they simply clung to life without understanding why everything around them was burning. As the hours passed, the tektite storm began to fade. The number of glowing streaks in the sky diminished. The radiant heat softened. But by then, the damage was done. Entire regions lay in ruins, charred, smoldering wastelands where forests once thrived. Animals that hadn't burned were left in a world thick with smoke and ash, their lungs struggling to pull in breathable air. Yet, strangely, the end of the firestorm did not bring relief. Instead, the fading flames signaled the transition into another phase of catastrophe, one colder, darker, and more enduring. The soot and debris now saturating the atmosphere would soon block sunlight, plunging the planet into a deep shadow. Photosynthesis would weaken. Temperatures would drop. The world would begin a slow descent into the so-called impact winter. But for now, the creatures of Earth only knew that the sky had caught fire, and that nothing would ever be the same again. While firestorms ravaged the skies and continents burned under the rain of molten debris, the oceans prepared a catastrophe of their own. The asteroid's impact had struck partly in shallow sea, violently displacing unimaginable quantities of water. The result was the birth of some of the largest tsunamis in Earth's history, waves so colossal that they dwarfed anything modern humans have ever witnessed. These oceanic giants began racing outward within seconds of impact, carrying destruction across thousands of kilometers of coastline. At the epicenter, the ocean vanished. The sheer force of the impact cratered the seafloor and forced trillions of liters of water outward in all directions. For a brief moment, a void replaced the ocean around the strike zone, exposing coral reefs, marine life, and seafloor sediments that had not seen open air for millions of years. This moment lasted barely seconds before water rushed back in with explosive power, meeting the rebounding crater walls and launching walls of water skyward. The waves that formed from this collision towered to heights unimaginable, hundreds of meters tall. They rose like liquid mountains, their crests curling forward with unstoppable momentum. The ocean roared, vibrating with destructive energy as the waves accelerated away from the impact site at speeds faster than many jet planes. Marine reptiles, fish, and countless smaller creatures were swept into the chaos, tossed violently as the water churned into a frenzy of foam, debris, and shattered life. As the megatsunamis radiated outward, they expanded their reach across the Gulf of Mexico, into the vast Atlantic, and through prehistoric waterways that connected continents. Coastlines thousands of kilometers from the impact felt the first signs, sudden tides receding unnaturally fast, beaches stretching far into the distance, exposing wet sand and panicked sea creatures that flopped desperately. Birds screeched and took flight. Land animals near the shore hesitated, confused by the retreat of the water that normally signaled danger but not this scale of chaos. Then the waves arrived. They struck shorelines like monstrous freight trains, demolishing everything in their path. Entire coastal forests vanished under walls of water. Herds of dinosaurs grazing near the sea were swallowed in seconds, their cries lost beneath the thunderous roar. Creatures were tossed like leaves, submerged beneath crushing layers of sediment and torn vegetation. Even large predators like tyrannosaurs stood no chance against the force. The waves picked up and hurled them inland like driftwood. Inland seas suffered the same fate. The western interior seaway, which split North America, became a cauldron of violence. Waves surged through the shallow waters, smashing into shorelines, flooding lowlands, and dragging entire ecosystems into disorder. Marine reptiles that dominated these waters, mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, and giant turtles, were suddenly swept into chaotic currents that flipped, crushed, and stranded them. Many suffocated in the turbulence or found themselves marooned in drying basins as waters sloshed back and forth unpredictably. Tsunamis continued their march across the world's oceans for hours. Each time they encountered shallower regions, their height increased again, rising like titanic beasts before crashing onto land with renewed fury. The waves dragged debris from one region to another, uprooted trees, boulders, dead reptiles, broken coral, volcanic ash, and even fragments of the asteroid. Sediment layers in future rock formations would later reveal this chaotic mixture, evidence of global ocean movement on an unimaginable scale. Farther offshore, deep-sea environments were thrown into chaos. The shockwave created underwater landslides, sending cascades of mud and rock plunging into abyssal depths. Creatures living in dark, stable environments, animals perfectly adapted to deep pressure and cold, were suddenly exposed to violent sediment flows that buried entire communities. Hydrothermal vents flickered. Some marine species that had survived countless evolutionary bottlenecks vanished in these frantic minutes. On islands and coastal plains, surviving animals found themselves clinging to anything that floated. Small dinosaurs struggled to stay above the waterline, using debris as makeshift rafts. Some pterosaurs attempted to take refuge in the air, only to be struck down by strong winds and flying debris. Insects swarmed above the waters, forming frantic clouds seeking higher ground that no longer existed. As the waves moved farther from the impact zone, their height gradually decreased, but their devastation did not. Even a fraction of their original size was enough to flatten coastlines and drown entire biomes. Some waves traveled as far as the opposite side of the globe, reaching distant continents many hours later, carrying ghostly echoes of a disaster no creature could escape. The hydraulic violence reshaped coastlines permanently. Beaches were swallowed, cliffs collapsed, new inlets formed where land had once stood. Entire river systems rerouted. Lagoons disappeared. Bays expanded. The map of the world shifted in real time, carved by water driven by cosmic force. Even after the waves settled, their legacy remained. Saltwater inland poisoning freshwater habitats. Marine carcasses rotted on forest floors. Entire regions turned into contaminated swamps of mud, bodies, uprooted vegetation, and stagnant water. Disease would take many creatures who survived the initial flooding. Those that escaped to higher ground faced new dangers, lack of food, shelter, and breathable air. Tsunamis had delivered another blow to a world already reeling from firestorms and atmospheric destruction. But the oceans were not finished contributing to the global catastrophe. Changing currents, altered salinity, and disrupted ecosystems would haunt marine life for decades, accelerating the collapse of food webs that had stood strong for millions of years. The age of dinosaurs had been shaped by oceans, warm, nutrient-rich waters that stabilized climate and supported life. But now those same oceans, stirred into fury by an asteroid from the void, became instruments of extinction. In the hours after the fires, the shockwaves, and the tsunamis, the world entered a new and even more terrifying phase of its destruction, one that unfolded not with explosive violence, but with a slow suffocation. The sky, once blistering with falling fire, now began to drown in darkness. What started as a haze soon thickened into a global shroud. Sunlight, the one force that had fueled life on Earth for billions of years, began to fade. The day the light died had begun. As countless fires burned across continents, they released mountains of soot and smoke into the atmosphere. Ash from incinerated forests and vaporized rock spiraled upward, forming colossal clouds that climbed through the troposphere and pierced the stratosphere. Molten droplets of glass, thrown high into the sky during the impact, cooled into finely powdered dust, creating a layer that spread outward like ink in water. The atmosphere became a canvas of darkness. At first, the change was subtle. Shadows deepened unnaturally. The sky took on a reddish-brown tint, as though dusk had arrived prematurely. Birds and smaller dinosaurs reacted with confusion, unsure if evening had come early. Some settled down to roost, others paced nervously, unable to reconcile their instincts with what they saw above. But as the hours passed, the light dimmed further, shifting from orange to deep crimson to a muddy brown-gray. By the next day, the sun was no longer a defined circle but a faint disk, blurred behind layers of smoke thicker than anything Earth had ever experienced. Even at midday, light levels resembled twilight. In some regions, the darkness was so complete that animals could not see their own feet. The world felt as though night had fallen permanently. Temperature began to drop. Without the sun's warmth penetrating the thickening atmospheric veil, the surface of the planet cooled rapidly. What had been a lush, warm world just days earlier now faced a sudden and brutal shift toward coldness. The heat from the fires offered brief pockets of warmth, but once the flames burned themselves out, even those flickers faded. Wind strengthened, pushing cooled air across continents. Rainstorms formed but carried soot and ash that turned them into black, toxic showers. Plants were the first to suffer. Without sunlight, photosynthesis slowed dramatically. Leaves that had survived the fires now began to yellow, wilt, and die. Flowering plants failed to bloom. Ferns curled in on themselves. Giant conifers, which had dominated landscapes for millions of years, dropped their needles in waves, blanketing the ground in brittle, colorless debris. Forests transitioned from green to gray in a matter of days. Herbivorous dinosaurs wandered through these dying landscapes in confusion. Their food sources vanished. Leaves that had once supplied abundant nutrition now crumbled into lifeless dust. Young dinosaurs bleated helplessly as their parents led them from grove to grove in search of anything edible. But the forest no longer offered sustenance, only silence and decay. Carnivores felt the shift indirectly but just as severely. Their prey grew weaker, scarcer. The once rich world of constant herbivore movement slowed to a crawl. Packs of dromaeosaurs searched for food among the shadows, snapping at anything that moved, even scavenging from individuals they wouldn't normally consider prey. Tyrannosaurs roared in frustration, their calls echoing through forests that no longer returned sound in vibrant echoes but instead swallowed it in suffocating stillness. Water sources, once shimmering and life-filled, now mirrored the darkened sky. Ash drifted down constantly, coating lakes and rivers until they resembled pools of ink. Fish floated belly up, poisoned by the sudden imbalance of chemicals. Marine ecosystems also began to collapse as plankton, the foundation of the ocean's food web, struggled without sunlight. The seas, even miles away from the impact zone, grew eerily quiet. Night and day lost meaning. Darkness ruled everything. This sudden and prolonged shadow, what scientists today call impact winter, became the true engine of extinction. The fires and tsunamis had delivered violent blows, but the darkness delivered the killing strike. Without sunlight, temperatures plummeted. Without warmth, ecosystems failed. Without plant life, herbivores starved. Without herbivores, carnivores followed. It was a chain reaction spreading across the globe with ruthless efficiency. Small creatures tried to adapt. Mammals curled deeper into their burrows, bodies pressed together for heat. Some species slowed their metabolisms, entering torpor-like states to conserve energy. Birds sought sheltered pockets of warmth, huddling in caves or beneath fallen logs. Reptiles buried themselves in mud or beneath rocks, trying to escape the cold. But the larger creatures, those that required vast amounts of food and warmth, found no such refuge. Sauropods wandered in desperation, their massive bodies unable to sustain themselves in a world turning barren. Ceratopsians pawed hopelessly at dead ferns and shrubs, trying to coax life from plants already gone. Hadrosaurs collapsed from starvation. Ankylosaurs, strong and armored but dependent on vegetation, slowed until they could move no more. Predators lasted only slightly longer. A tyrannosaur might scavenge the carcass of a fallen hadrosaur, but such meals became rare. Hunger gnawed relentlessly. Packs of smaller carnivores turned on one another. The rules of survival rewritten by desperation. And above it all, the sky remained dark. Lightning storms flickered occasionally, illuminating the dead forests with ghostly flashes. Volcanic regions erupted sporadically, adding more ash to the atmosphere. Acid rain fell in some areas, burning leaves and irritating the skin of animals that exposed themselves to it. The world had become a stage of chaos, with nature no longer nurturing life but suffocating it. Yet, despite it all, Earth continued to turn. Dawn and dusk still existed in a technical sense, but the difference between them was subtle, a shift from total darkness to dim dusk, then back again. Some creatures attempted to continue their daily cycles, guided purely by instinct, even though the environment no longer supported those rhythms. In certain parts of the world, the darkness lasted weeks. In others, months. The thickness of the cloud layer varied by region, but the overall effect remained the same: the sun had been stolen. And without it, the world was dying. This was the day the light died, not as a single moment, but as a slow eclipse of everything life depended on. A planet that had thrived under the sun's steady warmth for billions of years now faced the chilling consequence of a sky filled with dust and ash. The fires had burned the world. The tsunamis had reshaped it. But the darkness would starve it. And as the gloom deepened, the age of dinosaurs moved closer to its final breath. The world that emerged in the aftermath of the fading light was colder, harsher, and emptier than the dinosaurs had ever known. The transition from a warm, vibrant planet to a dim, freezing wasteland happened far faster than evolution could adapt to. Within days of the sky darkening, temperatures dropped dramatically. Within weeks, frost crept across landscapes that had never known such chill. Within months, the world had become a place of hunger, silence, and slow extinction. The great forests that once fed entire herds now stood brittle and lifeless. Their leaves had fallen in gray heaps, offering no nutrition to the creatures desperate enough to try eating them. Ferns and flowering plants collapsed into sludge. Even conifers, once symbols of resilience, lost their needles and withered. Herbivores wandered endlessly through these skeletal remains, their bodies shrinking, their movements slowing. They searched for food that no longer existed. Hadrosaur herds, once symbols of abundance and strength, now moved like ghosts across the barren ground. Their calls, once deep and resonant, took on a hollow tone. Calves struggled to keep up, their ribs showing through thinning skin. Adults nudged them forward with weary determination, but each passing day made survival harder. Herds that once numbered in the hundreds dwindled to dozens, then to scattered survivors. Hunger hollowed them from the inside out. Ceratopsians fared no better. Their formidable horns and frills, once used in mating displays and defense against predators, offered no protection against famine. They pawed at the frozen ground, scraping away layers of ash and dead vegetation, hoping for even a single green shoot beneath. But the soil was cold and empty. Their powerful beaks, designed to shear through tough plants, had nothing left to cut. The older individuals fell first, their strength waning. The young followed soon after. Sauropods, giants of the ancient world, suffered the most. Their massive bodies required enormous amounts of food, quantities impossible to find in a dying ecosystem. They moved slowly, dragging their tails through the ash that coated the earth. Their long necks searched the treetops for anything edible, but the forests offered nothing. Some tried chewing on bark, others knelt to graze on dead shrubs, but neither provided the nutrients they needed. One by one, these colossal creatures collapsed, their bodies leaving immense impressions in the frozen ground. Their reign, which had lasted over 100 million years, was ending quietly, swallowed by cold and starvation. Carnivores lasted slightly longer, but not by much. At first, they fed on the carcasses of herbivores collapsing across the plains. Tyrannosaurs roamed widely, drawn to the scent of death that hung in the air. They tore into frozen flesh, but even that was limited. As herbivores declined, so too did scavenging opportunities. Soon, too many predators competed for too few remains. Packs of dromaeosaurs fought viciously, sometimes turning on injured members of their own group in desperation. Raptors that once hunted with precision and coordination now moved erratically, weakened by hunger. A lone tyrannosaur, once ruler of its territory, stumbled through a dead forest, its breath sharp in the cold. The darkened sky offered no warmth. Its movements were slower now, its eyes duller. Hunger gnawed continuously, a constant ache that even a scavenged meal could not soothe for long. It let out a deep, rumbling call, a sound less like a roar and more like a mourning. No answer came. The world was too quiet. The smaller dinosaurs fared slightly better but were not spared. Feathered species huddled together for warmth, tucking their heads beneath their wings. Some dug shallow pits to escape the wind. But without insects and plants, their diets vanished. The colder it became, the more exhausted they grew. Each sunrise, dim and murky, brought fewer survivors. Water sources froze along their edges. Lakes that once shimmered under sunlight now reflected a cold, soot-black sky. Rivers ran sluggishly as ice formed around their banks. Many animals, desperate for hydration, risked approaching these contaminated waters. Some slipped and fell into icy depths. Others drank and perished from toxins seeping into what remained of the freshwater ecosystems. Even the oceans felt the chill. With plankton populations collapsing due to lack of sunlight, marine food webs weakened. Fish became scarce. Marine reptiles struggled to find enough prey. Cold currents shifted unpredictably, swirling through seas that were once warm and stable. The world's life support systems were failing. As the global chill deepened, silence spread across the continents. Sounds that once defined the Cretaceous, the trumpeting calls of hadrosaurs, the footsteps of titanosaurs, the roars of predators, the fluttering wings of pterosaurs, faded into stillness. Ash muffled every noise. Snow-like layers of soot blanketed the landscape. The wind carried only faint echoes of a world that once thrived. But despite the overwhelming odds, some creatures clung to life. Small mammals curled together in deep burrows, insulated from the cold by soil and fur. Their ability to eat anything, seeds, insects, carrion, offered them a survival edge. Birds with beaks suited for cracking seeds found rare pockets of nourishment. Crocodilians survived by slowing their metabolisms in mud-lined shelters, waiting out the cold as they had during ancient droughts. Yet for dinosaurs, these strategies were out of reach. They were too large, too energy-demanding, too dependent on lush ecosystems that no longer existed. Their world had collapsed too quickly. The cold bit deeper with each passing week. Hunger grew sharper. Hope, instinctive and wordless, flickered in the remaining herds and packs, but instinct could not reverse planetary collapse. The impact winter was tightening its grip, and the age of giants was slipping away. This frozen silence marked the beginning of the end, not through violence, but through starvation, cold, and the slow extinguishing of a world. In the deepening cold and suffocating darkness, the great giants of the Cretaceous faced the final chapter of their long dominion over Earth. For millions of years, they had reigned as the undisputed titans of the land, towering sauropods, formidable ceratopsians, thundering hadrosaurs. But now their strength, their size, and their evolutionary triumphs had become burdens in a world drained of warmth and food. The end did not come with sudden violence, but with exhaustion, hunger, and a quiet fading that echoed across a dying landscape. Sauropods were the first of the true giants to succumb. These enormous creatures, whose sheer size had once protected them from nearly all predators, were now prisoners of their own biology. They needed vast quantities of vegetation to survive, food that no longer existed. Their long necks swept across the barren treetops in slow arcs, searching for a single tuft of green, a lone sprig of life. But every branch was bare. Every forest was skeletal. Their massive stomachs churned with emptiness. One solitary sauropod, its ribs protruding through its thick hide, wandered across an ash-covered plain. Each step was heavy, labored. Its tail dragged behind it, a faint trail marking its path through the soot. It paused beside the remnants of a once lush grove, lowering its colossal neck to sniff the frozen ground. Nothing. It lifted its head toward the dim sky as though searching for warmth or guidance. Finding none, it continued walking until its legs gave out. Slowly, painfully, it sank to the ground, exhaled a long warm breath into the freezing air, and lay still. The earth trembled faintly beneath its final weight. Elsewhere, herds of hadrosaurs, once vibrant with energy and song, moved like ghosts through dead forests. Their crests, which had once echoed with communication calls, now produced weak, hollow notes. Young hadrosaurs pressed close to adults for comfort, their bodies shivering from the cold and hunger that pierced their bones. The adults attempted to lead them to regions that might still hold food, but every path ended in barren wasteland. One by one, the youngsters collapsed. Adults nosed at them gently, urging them to rise, but instinct could not overcome starvation. The herd continued onward with fewer and fewer members, until only a handful remained. Ceratopsians, with their sturdy bodies and imposing horns, did not fall quietly. They fought their decline with determination. In one desolate valley, a group of triceratops gathered around a patch of dead shrubs. They pawed desperately at the frozen earth, scraping away layers of ash in search of roots. Frost clung to their frills. Their breaths steamed heavily in the cold air. When one old bull collapsed from exhaustion, the others stood around him, letting out soft, mournful grunts. His eyes closed slowly, the strength that once made him a dominant force fading into stillness. Predators continued to roam, drawn by the scent of weakening giants. But even they had reached the limit of their endurance. A lone tyrannosaur emerged from the shadows, ribs showing beneath its hide. Its once terrifying stride was now a sluggish trudge. It approached a dying hadrosaur lying on its side, but instead of launching a mighty attack, it stood beside the fallen creature as though both recognized their shared fate. The tyrannosaur eventually tore into the carcass, but even this rare meal could not reverse the decline. Hunger was constant. Cold was relentless. As the giants weakened, scavengers multiplied. Dromaeosaurs picked at the edges of carcasses. Mammals braved the open to feed on scraps. Birds descended onto bodies that dotted the landscape like grim milestones. But even scavengers found survival difficult as the number of fresh carcasses dwindled and the cold deepened. In some regions, pockets of resistance formed, groups of herbivores clustering together for warmth and collective movement. Titanosaurs trudged shoulder to shoulder. Triceratops gathered in defensive circles. But no amount of cooperation could conjure food or warmth. The darkness above continued to thicken, and temperatures dropped further. Ice formed around the edges of once temperate lakes. Soot blanketed everything. One particularly poignant scene played out at the edge of a frozen river. A mother hadrosaur stood protectively beside her juvenile, nudging it gently as it struggled to stand. The young one shivered, legs trembling, breath coming in weak gasps. The mother lowered her head, pressing her snout against its side as though urging it back to life. But the cold had already claimed the little one. As the mother lingered, unsure of what to do, her own legs buckled. She lay down beside her offspring, curling her body around it in a final act of warmth. Snow like ash fell over them both, covering them in a pale, quiet blanket. The decline of the giants was not sudden. It was a slow, drawn-out unraveling, a tragedy of hunger and cold. Their final days were marked not by the roaring battles of their prime but by silence, struggle, and the diminishing spark of life in a world that no longer supported them. As the last surviving herds faded, the earth grew eerily quiet. The thunderous footsteps that once shook the ground were gone. The forests no longer echoed with the calls of hadrosaurs or the rumbling bellows of massive herbivores. Even the predators fell silent, their roars replaced by the soft thud of weakened bodies dropping into the snow-covered ash. The giants who had shaped entire ecosystems, who had dominated Earth for ages, were gone. Their era ended not with a final roar, but with a whisper lost in the cold wind. The age of dinosaurs was nearing its last breath, and the silence that followed their fall was profound, a stillness that marked the end of a world and the beginning of something entirely new. While the land world froze, burned, and starved, the oceans, long considered life's greatest refuge, were collapsing under their own cascade of disasters. For millions of years, the seas had nurtured vast and intricate ecosystems, coral reefs glowing with color, massive shoals of fish, and marine reptiles that dominated the water as completely as dinosaurs ruled the land. But the impact had not spared the oceans. In fact, the seas were unraveling just as rapidly, becoming graveyards of creatures shaped by eons of evolution. The first blow came from the colossal tsunamis triggered by the impact. These waves had torn through coastal ecosystems, shredding coral reefs, uprooting kelp forests, and tossing fragile marine life far inland. But the deeper damage came after, the slow poisoning and darkening of the water that followed in the days and weeks after the asteroid strike. Ash and soot from global fires drifted across the oceans, settling on the surface like dark, toxic snow. Waves carried the material downward, creating murky layers that blocked sunlight from reaching the upper levels of the water column. Sunlight, the driving force behind ocean life, disappeared. The once blue waters turned gray, then black, absorbing nothing but shadows. Phytoplankton, tiny photosynthetic organisms that formed the foundation of marine food webs, were the first victims. Without sunlight, they could not survive. Their numbers plummeted. As they died, the oxygen levels in the water dropped, leading to stagnant regions where marine life suffocated. The oceans, which had once fed countless species, now starved from the bottom up. Fish swam closer to the surface in search of oxygen, their movements erratic and panicked. Schools that had once moved with mesmerizing unity now scattered in chaotic bursts. Many floated belly up as suffocation overtook them. Their silver bodies shimmered faintly before becoming part of the growing layer of death on the ocean floor. Marine reptiles that had thrived for generations struggled to adapt. Mosasaurs, apex predators of the seas, found their hunting grounds eerily empty. They swam through dark, debris-filled waters, their powerful tails sweeping side to side as they searched for prey that was no longer abundant. A once bold mosasaur glided through a blackened reef, its jaws opening and closing as though tasting the water. The usual scents of fish, ammonites, and smaller reptiles were gone. Hunger gnawed at it, much like the land predators suffering above. Plesiosaurs, with their elegant necks and smooth bodies, attempted to follow fish deeper into the ocean. But the deeper they swam, the colder and darker it became. Many were unable to find food or oxygen-rich pockets of water. Their bodies eventually drifted downward, sinking in slow spirals until they reached the silty seabed. There, they settled among countless other victims in a landscape of quiet decay. Even ammonites, the spiral-shelled icons of prehistoric seas, faced extinction. These creatures had survived multiple mass extinction events before, but this one proved too severe. Their food sources vanished. Their larvae, dependent on healthy plankton populations, could not mature. Their shells, once drifting elegantly in the currents, now littered the ocean floor in vast, silent graveyards. Coral reefs, already battered by tsunamis, suffered another blow. With no sunlight, they could no longer sustain the symbiotic algae that lived within their tissues. The corals bleached, turning bone-white before dying entirely. Reef fish that depended on these vibrant structures for shelter found themselves exposed and vulnerable. Many were quickly picked off by predators, those few that still had enough strength to hunt. And beneath all of this, deep-sea communities felt the shock too. Though insulated from surface chaos, they relied indirectly on nutrients drifting downward from above. As the rain of organic particles ceased, entire deep ecosystems began to starve. Tube worms, crustaceans, and ancient organisms that clung to hydrothermal vents experienced a slow decline as the ocean's life cycle broke down. Even the temperature of the sea changed. With sunlight blocked, surface waters cooled rapidly. Cold currents sank and mixed with deeper layers, altering circulation patterns that had remained stable for millions of years. Creatures adapted to narrow ranges of temperature found themselves struggling in water too cold for their metabolisms. Sharks slowed. Turtles sank into torpor. Fish drifted aimlessly, their energy reserves dwindling. One scene repeated across the world: a lone marine reptile, mosasaur, plesiosaur, ichthyosaur, rising toward the surface for a breath, only to break through a film of ash-coated water. Its nostrils flared, drawing in a lungful of air mixed with soot. Coughing, confused, it dove back down, swimming in circles as it searched for clearer waters that did not exist. The oceans were turning into dark chambers of silence. Yet in this devastation, small pockets of resilience emerged. Some deep-water organisms, relying on chemosynthesis rather than sunlight, held on. A few hardy species of plankton survived in rare patches where water circulation allowed faint light to penetrate. Small scavengers fed on the growing carpet of dead marine life, sustaining themselves on the abundance of decay. But these survivors were exceptions. The vast majority of marine species, those that had filled Earth's waters with life and complexity, were fading. The extinction in the oceans, though less visually dramatic than the fires on land, was equally complete, equally heart-wrenching. The seas had become dark, toxic, cold, and still. The age of dinosaurs dominated the land, but the oceans had always been kingdoms of their own. Now, those kingdoms were crumbling under ash, darkness, and starvation. The world beneath the waves, once a place of movement and color, had fallen into quiet ruin. Amid the darkness, the cold, and the collapsing ecosystems, not all life vanished. Hidden beneath the blanket of devastation were creatures that, through a mixture of biology, instinct, and sheer chance, found ways to endure. These survivors were not the giants that once ruled the world. They were the overlooked, the small, the adaptable, the ones who did not rely on abundant sunlight or vast forests to sustain themselves. As the age of dinosaurs crumbled, these shadow dwellers quietly held on to existence. Small mammals were among the first to demonstrate resilience. For millions of years, they had lived in the margins, scurrying through undergrowth, hiding from predators, feeding on insects, seeds, and anything their sharp little teeth could manage. Now, as darkness smothered the world, these abilities became their salvation. Many species burrowed deep underground, sealed away from the bitter cold and falling ash. Inside these cramped, dirt-lined refuges, they curled together for warmth. Their heart rates slowed, metabolisms dipped, and their bodies entered states resembling torpor or extended rest. They survived on stored food, on whatever insects remained, or on their own fat reserves. It wasn't easy, it was desperate, borderline miraculous, but it worked. Birds, the last descendants of dinosaurs, found their own paths of endurance. Smaller species with beaks built for cracking seeds had an advantage. Seeds could persist long after living plants had died, hidden within cones, buried under soil, or scattered across the ground before the world plunged into shadow. Birds capable of flight sought out these hidden reserves, hopping through the dim and silent forests. Their feathers provided insulation. Their small size demanded less energy. Each day they lived through was another that the ancient lineage of dinosaurs would carry into the future. Crocodilians, creatures older than many of the dinosaurs themselves, endured thanks to their mastery of stillness. Adapted to environments of fluctuating water and temperature, they retreated into mud-lined riverbanks and stagnant waters, slowing their heart rates to a crawl. Their cold-blooded biology allowed them to consume almost no energy for long periods. In these suspended states, they waited, days, weeks, even months, until conditions improved. Their young, protected in murky swamps that fires could not fully reach, lingered quietly beneath the surface, hidden from the chaos above. Certain freshwater environments offered surprising refuges. Lakes, rivers, and marshes that hadn't frozen entirely or boiled during the worst moments became pockets of survival. Here, fish sheltered beneath layers of ash, while amphibians curled into muddy burrows at the water's edge. Insects, those few that survived, laid dormant eggs or larvae that would hatch only when conditions improved. These tiny reservoirs of life, though fragile, held sparks of biodiversity that would help repopulate the Earth long after the darkness faded. Reptiles like turtles and lizards also found ways to persist. Turtles burrowed into soft sediment or hid beneath logs submerged in cold water. Their ability to survive with minimal oxygen, to remain motionless for startling lengths of time, made them well-suited for global catastrophe. Some lizards, especially those with flexible diets and burrowing habits, hid beneath stones and in cracks where temperatures remained just barely survivable. Even insects, tiny, easily overlooked, played a role in survival. Certain species, including hardy beetles and burrowing larvae, endured the cold by retreating deep into soil layers warmed slightly by the earth itself. Though their populations were devastated, enough survived to ensure future generations. These insects would eventually become crucial food sources for the first animals to emerge when the world warmed again. Some dinosaurs, too, managed to survive, but only the small, bird-like ones. These early birds, agile and quick, found safety in crevices, caves, and thick vegetation that shielded them from the worst of the falling debris and firestorms. Their hollow bones and feathered bodies helped retain heat. Their insectivorous or omnivorous diets allowed them to eat whatever they could find. Their intelligence, relative to many other creatures, may have helped them seek shelter more effectively. These were not the mighty thunder lizards of the past. They were the small, the clever, the resilient. While giants starved, these survivors adapted. Not all who hid would endure. Many mammals died in their burrows when air became too thin. Some birds perished when their food stores ran out. Turtles froze solid in waters too cold even for their biology. But enough persisted, an army of the overlooked quietly waiting for the world to heal. As weeks turned into months, the survivors continued living on the margins. The world was still shrouded in darkness. The cold lingered. Food remained scarce. But gradually, the fires diminished. The skies began to settle. Ash drifted down in softer waves. The atmosphere thinned. Slowly, painfully slowly, the first hints of sunlight attempted to pierce the gloom. In this subdued, dim world, the survivors emerged tentatively. A small mammal poked its head from a burrow, whiskers trembling as it sniffed the frigid air. A bird fluttered awkwardly between tree branches, searching for seeds still hidden beneath frozen soil. A crocodile stirred beneath icy water, its ancient eyes opening to a gray, muted world. These moments were quiet, unremarkable on the surface, but they marked the beginning of Earth's recovery. The survivors were not the strongest, nor the largest, nor the most magnificent. They were simply the most adaptable. They did not overpower their environments, they endured them. Their survival was not a triumph of dominance, but of persistence. In the shadows of a dying world, these small sparks of life clung to existence. And through them, the story of Earth would continue. They would carry the genetic seeds of future ages, ages that would unfold long after the last dinosaur had fallen silent. Months had passed since the asteroid's impact plunged the world into cold and shadow. The darkness that once felt permanent, thick, suffocating, and impenetrable, had begun to thin in places. It did not happen all at once. It began as a faint shift in the grayness, a softening of the gloom that most creatures barely noticed. But gradually, the soot and ash suspended in the atmosphere started to drift downward or scatter to the edges of the sky. Tiny cracks in the darkness appeared, subtle at first, like someone had gently scraped the surface of night. And then, one day, the first weak rays of sunlight broke through. It was not the golden warmth the world once knew. It was pale, faint, and unfamiliar, more like the memory of sunlight than the real thing. Still, it was enough to stir life. A small bird, perched on the branch of a dead tree, blinked rapidly as a sliver of brightness touched its feathers. Confused, it tilted its head, unsure whether this moment was real or imagined. But instinct told it that light meant hope, and hope meant movement. Slowly, it fluttered its wings and greeted the dim sun with a soft chirp, the first birdsong in months. Across the landscape, the world responded in subtle, fragile ways. Melted patches began to form in the frozen ground. Ash layers thinned as winds blew them aside. Rivers that had been choked with soot and debris flowed a little clearer. The temperature, still bitterly cold, rose by only the smallest degree, but even that minor shift allowed certain species to stir from torpor. A mammal poked its head from a burrow, blinking furiously as the dim light reflected off the ash-covered earth. Its fur was matted, its body thin, but it sniffed the air with curiosity and a trace of cautious optimism. The world still smelled of decay and cold, but not quite as hopeless as before. It scurried out, searching for seeds that had survived beneath the soil's surface. For the first time in months, the odds of finding food had improved, if only slightly. Crocodilians stirred from their mud-lined shelters as well. The faint warmth softened the edges of the frozen water. Slowly, lethargically, they rose to the surface, their eyes breaking through the thin ice. They inhaled deeply, tasting air that still carried toxins and smoke, but also the faintest hint of sunlight. Their ancient bodies adjusted, warmed by even the smallest fraction of returning heat. Insect life, too, began to re-emerge. In the cracks of dead trees, beneath rocks, and within buried soil layers, tiny creatures wriggled back to motion. Beetles crawled cautiously across the cold ground, searching for organic matter left behind by the extinction. Larvae that had remained dormant now twitched and hatched, adding new sparks of movement to the silent world. Plant life was the slowest to recover, but even here, resilience shone through. Seeds that had remained dormant through the cold began to sense the returning light. They cracked open tentatively. Small, pale shoots pushed their way upward through ash and frozen soil. They grew weakly at first, lacking strong sunlight, but their emergence marked a powerful turning point. Wherever even a handful of plants began to grow, entire ecosystems could eventually rebuild. The oceans responded too. As sunlight filtered through thinning clouds, plankton, those tiny architects of marine life, began to awaken. The first cells drifted upward in search of the faintest hint of illumination. Slowly, their populations began to rebound in small patches. Fish, their numbers drastically reduced, returned to feeding behaviors. The seas, though still dark and wounded, began the long process of recovery. But these early rays of light did not erase the suffering. They merely softened it. The world remained cold and desolate. Countless species were already gone forever. Many survivors were still on the edge of starvation. There were no forests yet, no lush plains, no thriving herds. The sunlight that returned was not strong enough to restore the world overnight. It was enough only to keep the thread of life from snapping completely. The dinosaurs, those remaining few small bird-like species, also felt the shift. Perched in sheltered pockets of rock and broken forests, they fluffed their feathers against the cold and searched for newly uncovered seeds or insects crawling back into view. Their keen eyes scanned the horizon, not with the confidence of their ancestors but with caution. Their world was smaller now, quieter, and infinitely more fragile. Yet they endured, driven by instinct and the faint warmth touching their wings. Above it all, the sky looked wounded but healing. The clouds of soot no longer formed an impenetrable dome. Instead, they thinned into streaks and patches. The sun, once hidden, now appeared as a blurred orb, dim but undeniably present. Each day grew a little brighter. Each day carried a little more warmth. The long night was ending. Life, battered but unbroken, began its slow ascent from the brink. This was not a triumphant dawn, but it was a dawn nonetheless, a quiet, humble beginning marking the world's first steps toward rebirth. The creatures that survived emerged into this light not as rulers, but as remnants of an older time, carrying with them the fragile hope that someday, the earth would flourish again. The aftermath of the Great Darkness marked not only the end of an age but the first stirring breath of a world beginning to rebuild itself. Earth, wounded and scarred by the cataclysm, slowly shifted from devastation toward recovery. This rebirth was not swift, not dramatic, and certainly not easy. It unfolded over years, centuries, and millennia, a gradual healing guided by the stubborn resilience of life. In every corner of the battered planet, small changes hinted at renewal, each one a quiet promise that Earth was not finished. The first signs came from plants. Seeds buried in soil before the impact had remained dormant through the cold months, protected from firestorms and freezing temperatures. Now, as sunlight began to seep back into the world, these seeds awoke. Tiny shoots pushed upward through layers of ash, pale and trembling but alive. Grass-like plants emerged first, followed by hardy ferns and simple flowering species capable of thriving in poor soils. They took root in cracks, in patches of loose sediment, and in the forgotten corners of forests burned to their skeletons. Over time, these early pioneers transformed the landscape. What had been gray plains of ash slowly sprouted green. Fern prairies spread across vast regions, creating carpets of delicate fronds that softened the earth's wounds. The first returning forests were primitive and sparse, but they provided shelter where none had existed for months. Their presence allowed insects to flourish again, which in turn supported the birds and small mammals that had survived the impact winter. Animals followed in the footsteps of plant life, expanding cautiously as new habitats formed. Mammals, once small and overshadowed by dinosaurs, began to diversify. Their flexibility, their ability to eat a wide array of foods, gave them an advantage in this rebuilding world. Some grew larger as resources slowly increased. Others adapted to new environments, taking on nocturnal habits, climbing behaviors, or burrowing lifestyles suited to landscapes still prone to unpredictable changes. Birds, the last living descendants of the dinosaurs, also began to radiate into new forms. Freed from competition with giant non-avian dinosaurs, they explored new niches. Some species evolved longer legs for running across open plains. Others developed stronger beaks for cracking seeds and nuts now abundant in the recovering forests. Feathers grew more colorful as environment stabilized, bringing back the vibrancy stripped away by the ash-darkened skies. Their songs, once silenced by the world's suffering, returned in soft, tentative notes before eventually filling the air again. Reptiles, too, reclaimed their place in the reborn world. Crocodilians, whose ancient bodies had withstood the global collapse, prospered in newly formed wetlands and recovering river systems. Turtles began laying eggs along warming shores. Lizards, adaptable as ever, multiplied in regions where insects returned. Though many ancient reptilian lineages had fallen, these survivors carried their ecosystems forward with patient resilience. The oceans, perhaps the hardest hit, responded slowly but steadily. As atmospheric ash settled and sunlight penetrated the water again, plankton populations resurged. These microscopic drifters formed the base of the marine food chain, and their return signaled hope. Coral reefs began to rebuild, though differently than before. New species adapted to the slightly altered chemistry of the post-impact oceans. Fish populations grew once more, exploring the recovering reefs and open seas. Marine reptiles had largely vanished, but sharks and bony fish took their place, evolving into new forms that would dominate future eras. Geologically, Earth continued to reshape itself long after the impact. Craters filled with water, becoming lakes or shallow seas. Tsunami-carved coastlines smoothed over centuries of sediment deposition. Volcanoes that had been active during the extinction event gradually quieted, giving the atmosphere a chance to recover fully. The climate, once thrown into chaos, stabilized slowly as carbon cycles resumed and plant life captured excess greenhouse gases released by the fires. Over thousands of years, forests regained their strength. Conifers returned first, tall and solemn, followed by broadleaf trees that flourished in warmer regions. Ferns and shrubs expanded into diverse communities. New ecosystems formed, ones that mirrored the past but were distinct in their species composition. Evolution had begun its unending dance again, shaping life to fit the altered world. In this reborn Earth, the absence of dinosaurs became strikingly evident. The giants that once thundered across the land were gone, leaving niches wide open. Mammals stepped into roles once dominated by herbivorous and carnivorous dinosaurs. Some grew larger, becoming the first substantial mammals in Earth's history. The disappearance of towering sauropods and hulking ceratopsians created space for mammals to graze freely. Predatory roles once held by tyrannosaurs and raptors now opened pathways for mammals to evolve sharper claws, keener senses, and more complex hunting strategies. With fewer ecological giants, the world also became quieter. No more thunderous footsteps shaking the ground. No more echoing bellows across the plains. Instead, the air filled with softer sounds, birdsong, rustling leaves, the scurrying of mammals through underbrush. It was a gentler world, a humbler one, shaped not by brute force but by persistence. But rebirth did not mean a simple return to what once was. The impact had created new environments, crater basins, rocky plains littered with debris, volcanic ash fields that slowly transformed into fertile soil. Life evolved to fill these new landscapes. New species emerged that were unlike anything from the Cretaceous. Evolution, catalyzed by extinction, accelerated into new directions. The planet itself seemed to breathe again. Rain fell more frequently, washing away soot. Rivers carved new channels through softened earth. Winds carried seeds to fresh ground. Slowly, the earth regained its vibrancy, its colors, its pulse. And with this resurgence came something even more profound, a shift in the trajectory of life. The world no longer belonged to the dinosaurs. Their time had ended. The survivors, the small, the adaptable, the resilient, were now the ancestors of the future. In the ashes of their reign, life found a way to rise again. This quiet rebirth marked the dawn of a new chapter, one that would pave the way for the next great age of evolution, a world where mammals would rise, forests would reshape continents, and new creatures would inherit the earth. As Earth healed and the scars of the Great Extinction slowly softened, the world entered a new and transformative chapter. The giants were gone. The thunderous footsteps that once shook the ground had fallen silent. In their absence, the planet felt strangely open, like a vast and empty stage waiting for new actors. And into this space stepped the creatures long overshadowed by the dinosaurs, the mammals. For millions of years, mammals had lived in the margins. They were small, nocturnal, and cautious, their lives shaped by the constant pressure of surviving in a world dominated by enormous predators and towering herbivores. They scurried underfoot, hid in burrows, and ventured into the open only under the cover of darkness. Their existence had been one of adaptation, patience, and quiet resilience. Now, for the first time, the world belonged to them. In the early centuries following the extinction, mammals remained small and wary, their instincts shaped not by opportunity, but by survival. But as ecosystems stabilized and food sources became increasingly abundant, they began to explore new territories and niches. Insects returned. Plants flourished. Seeds, fruits, and small invertebrates offered consistent nourishment. Slowly at first, and then with increasing confidence, mammals expanded their presence across the recovering landscapes. Some species grew larger than their ancestors, taking advantage of open spaces where dinosaurs once roamed. Early herbivorous mammals began to fill the roles vacated by hadrosaurs and ceratopsians, feeding on new growth with grinding teeth and efficient digestive systems. Predatory mammals emerged as well, equipped with sharper claws, more powerful jaws, and senses honed by generations of avoiding larger threats. The balance of nature, once dictated by dinosaur-driven hierarchies, began to reshape itself around these new mammals. What set mammals apart was not simply their adaptability, but their biology. Warm-blooded and fur-covered, they were better equipped to handle the fluctuating climates of the post-impact world. Their ability to regulate body temperature allowed them to thrive in environments still prone to cold snaps and unpredictable weather. Their reproductive strategies, bearing live young and nurturing them with milk, gave their offspring a better chance of survival in a world still finding its footing. Forests regrew, and mammals followed. Some took to the trees, evolving grasping hands, flexible limbs, and keen eyesight. These early arboreal mammals laid the groundwork for primates, small, curious, intelligent creatures who would one day change the course of Earth forever. Primitive primates hopped through branches, feeding on insects and fruits, relying on agility and coordination rather than size or strength. Other mammals remained ground dwellers. Some burrowed beneath the soil, creating intricate networks of tunnels where they could hide from emerging predators and survive harsh seasons. Their descendants would one day evolve into rodents, species that would spread across continents and thrive in every conceivable environment. The post-impact world was a patchwork of opportunity, and mammals explored every possibility. Near rivers and wetlands, some mammals adapted to semi-aquatic lifestyles, developing webbed feet or streamlined bodies. Over millions of years, these early ancestors would give rise to entirely new groups, creatures like beavers, otters, and eventually even whales, which returned to the oceans their ancient ancestors had once left behind. The seas, once ruled by mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, now belonged to the descendants of land-dwelling mammals. Predatory mammals evolved swiftly as well. With the disappearance of tyrannosaurs and raptors, the role of apex predator opened for new candidates. Some mammals developed sharp teeth and powerful limbs suitable for chasing prey. Others specialized in scavenging, using keen senses of smell to locate carcasses. Hunting strategies became more sophisticated. Intelligence, already a strength of mammals, grew increasingly important. Cooperation and problem-solving became tools for survival. The absence of dinosaurs also changed the planet's rhythms. Nights were no longer dominated by the looming silhouettes of giant predators. Days were no longer punctuated by the calls of massive herbivores. Mammals filled these quiet spaces with their own sounds, chirps, squeaks, growls, and calls that echoed through recovering forests and open plains. But the rise of mammals was not instantaneous or inevitable. It was a slow, gradual process shaped by countless environmental pressures. Many species failed. Others thrived. Evolution, as always, rewarded those best suited to the world's changing conditions. Intelligence, flexibility, and endurance became the traits that mattered most. Among the early mammals, a particular lineage of small, tree-dwelling creatures stood out, the primates. With grasping hands, depth-perceiving eyes, and increasingly complex social behaviors, these early primates would go on to diversify across the planet. Their descendants would eventually include lemurs, monkeys, apes, and millions of years later, humans. The age of mammals was not just a shift in dominance, it was a shift in destiny. The extinction that had ended the reign of the dinosaurs cleared a path for a new kind of life to rise. It created the conditions that allowed intelligence, empathy, cooperation, and curiosity to flourish in unprecedented ways. The world that once belonged to giants now belonged to survivors who had endured the darkness through adaptability rather than brute strength. Their rise would reshape Earth's future, leading not only to new species and ecosystems, but to new ways of thinking, communicating, and experiencing the world. And so, with each small step, each new adaptation, each generation born into a world slowly healing, the age of mammals began, quietly at first, but destined to echo across time. Long after the fires died, long after the giants fell, and long after the skies cleared, Earth remained haunted by the memory of what had been lost. The world that emerged after the extinction was different in shape, in sound, in spirit. Yet everywhere, across plains, forests, mountains, and oceans, echoes of the ancient world lingered like faint whispers. These echoes lived not only in fossils buried beneath layers of ash and sediment, but in the creatures that survived, in the landscapes reshaped by catastrophe, and in the silent stories written into the very bones of the earth. The land still bore scars. Deep craters, shattered coastlines, and plains of strange sediment told the tale of unimaginable violence. Forests regrew in patterns unfamiliar to the past, spreading across ground enriched by ash yet forever marked by the trauma of fire. Rivers carved new routes through debris fields, while mountains showed fractures from seismic waves that had shaken them to their cores. Even as life returned, the planet itself remembered the impact, carrying physical reminders that would persist for millions of years. Animals, too, bore the echoes of the world that had vanished. Birds, now flourishing in the absence of their ancestral cousins, carried within them the genetic legacy of dinosaurs. Their feathers rustled like distant whispers of wings that once cast far larger shadows. Their calls, though softer and higher, contained rhythms shaped by evolutionary history tied directly to creatures that once ruled the skies and land. Every chirp, every flutter, every swoop was both survival and remembrance. Mammals, rapidly diversifying, filled ecological roles left empty by the vanished giants. Yet some of their instincts reflected ancient fears. Many still preferred the cover of darkness, a behavior inherited from ancestors that hid from dinosaurs in the night. Their wary movements, their sensitivity to predators, their reliance on burrows, these habits were shaped by an age long gone but not forgotten. The world carried forward the lessons of its past even as new species emerged. In the soil, layers of ash and rock told a silent story. Geologists millions of years later would discover the iridium-rich boundary marking the end of the Cretaceous, a thin line dividing one world from another. It was the Earth's own obituary for the dinosaurs, a geological signature of catastrophe. Every time wind eroded a cliff or a river cut through sedimentary layers, the planet revealed another echo of the moment everything changed. Some survivors bore physical traces of the lost world too. Crocodilians, nearly unchanged, continued gliding through rivers as they had for over 200 million years. Their armored bodies and ancient eyes were living reminders of the creatures that once filled the earth. Turtles paddled through lakes with shells that had endured every extinction the planet had ever known. Even certain insects, dragonflies, beetles, ants, continued rhythmic behaviors shaped by ancestors who once lived beneath dinosaur shadows. Sometimes, the echoes took subtle forms. The shape of a leaf that evolved in response to ancient herbivores nibbling at its edges. The migration patterns of animals tracing routes established long before the impact. The distribution of plant species shaped by continents arranged during the late Cretaceous. The Earth was quieter now, but those quiet patterns carried within them the resonance of lost ages. Even the absence of dinosaurs became an echo. The silence in forests where hadrosaurs once trumpeted. The stillness of plains where ceratopsians once clashed. The emptiness of lakes where long-necked giants once drank. Their departure created voids that would remain, for a time, like hollow spaces in an unfinished melody. The world had to learn new rhythms. It had to find new voices. Yet, paradoxically, the loss also became a source of creation. Extinction cleared the path for innovation. Ecosystems rebalanced themselves. New predator-prey dynamics emerged. New forms of intelligence, social behavior, and ecological cooperation evolved. The absence of giants allowed smaller creatures to flourish, and through them, the world discovered new ways to express life's resilience. But the echoes were not purely biological or geological. They resonated on a philosophical level as well, an ancient reminder of the fragility of existence. The asteroid had not chosen Earth. It had no intent. Yet its arrival reshaped the future of every living organism. This randomness, this cosmic indifference, became perhaps the deepest echo of all. Life learned, in its own quiet ways, that survival depended not on dominance, but on adaptability. In time, these echoes would whisper to beings far different from dinosaurs or primitive mammals. Early primates, evolving in the safety of trees, would one day consider the world around them and sense the ancientness beneath their feet. Millions of years later, humans would discover the bones of colossal creatures buried in stone, piecing together the forgotten world of giants. The echoes, once silent, would become stories, stories that shaped our understanding of life, fragility, power, and time. But all of that was far in the future. In the age immediately following the extinction, the echoes were subtle, quiet, known only to the world itself. They lived in the shape of landscapes, the behaviors of animals, the patterns of plants, and the chemistry of the oceans. They were woven into the fabric of evolution, shaping the direction life would take. And even though the dinosaurs were gone, their presence did not vanish entirely. Their legacy survived in birds soaring across the recovering skies. Their forms survived in fossils that would stand the test of time. Their influence survived in ecosystems shaped by millions of years of their dominance. Their spirit survived in the story of Earth, a story written in fire, ash, and rebirth. The lost world echoed still, not as a haunting, but as a reminder that every age rises, falls, and leaves behind traces that guide what comes next. The dinosaurs' time had ended, but their echoes would never fade. In the long arc of Earth's history, the asteroid that ended the age of dinosaurs was not just an ancient catastrophe, it became a defining chapter in the story that would eventually lead to us. Though it struck 66 million years before the first human ever walked the Earth, its influence ripples forward through time like an echo that never fully fades. That single moment, that cosmic collision, shaped the world we inherited and determined who we are as a species. In a sense, the asteroid is woven into our very existence. Before the impact, mammals lived small, hidden lives. They were background characters in a world ruled by giants, creatures stronger, faster, and far more dominant than the furry, nocturnal survivors scurrying in the shadows. Without the asteroid, dinosaurs would likely have continued evolving, dominating ecosystems and occupying niches that mammals could never fill. Mammals may have remained small, limited, and overshadowed for tens of millions more years. Intelligence, curiosity, and complex societies, traits that eventually defined humans, might never have emerged. But the asteroid changed all of that in an instant. By wiping out the dominant life forms of the time, it opened ecological space for mammals to rise, adapt, diversify, and ultimately shape the destiny of the planet. The extinction was brutal, indiscriminate, and tragic, but it also reset the evolutionary board. It forced life to reinvent itself. And through that reinvention, new possibilities were born. Every breath we take, every step we walk, every story we tell is part of a timeline made possible by a rock from space. The impact is not just an event that destroyed a world, it is an event that created the world we know. We owe our existence to both the fragility and resilience of life. This realization forces us to confront a profound truth: life on Earth is shaped not only by biology and natural selection, but also by the random, unpredictable forces of the cosmos. A single object, no larger than a city, appeared in the sky one day and altered the course of evolution forever. If it had arrived a few seconds earlier or later, it might have splashed harmlessly into deeper ocean, causing far less damage. If it had struck a different region of Earth, the outcome might have been drastically different. If it had missed entirely, the world today might still belong to creatures with scales, claws, and thunderous footsteps. This randomness humbles us. It reminds us that existence is precarious, that life can pivot on moments we cannot predict or control. The dinosaurs, with all their power and diversity, had no warning. They had no way to prepare. They were masters of their world, until their world changed in an instant. Their story is a reminder that dominance offers no immunity to cosmic chance. Yet there is also hope in this idea. Life did not merely end, it adapted. It found new shapes, new forms, new ways to thrive. The asteroid's impact ultimately became a catalyst for innovation. The survivors, small, unassuming, often overlooked, carried forward the flame of life and reshaped the Earth in their image. Without their persistence, the future would have unfolded very differently. In this sense, the asteroid is not just a destroyer in our story, it is a creator. It made room for primates, who would eventually explore the world with hands, eyes, and minds capable of understanding it. It made room for social structures, communication, and emotions that bonded groups into families and tribes. It made room for curiosity, one of the most powerful forces in the universe. And eventually, it made room for a species capable of asking questions about its own origins, humans. We are, in many ways, children of the catastrophe. Our existence is built upon the bones of worlds that came before us. We evolved because life found opportunity in devastation. The asteroid stands as a symbol of both destruction and rebirth, reminding us that endings are often beginnings in disguise. The most profound connection between that ancient impact and us lies not just in biology, but in perspective. The dinosaurs lived in a world where the sky was simply the sky, a dome of light and weather. They had no concept of space, or asteroids, or cosmic danger. But we do. We can look upward and understand what they could not, that the universe is filled with objects capable of rewriting our future. We can see the scars the asteroid left behind. We can analyze the crater, study the fossils, and trace the unfolding of time with scientific clarity. And, perhaps most importantly, we can take action. Unlike the dinosaurs, humanity possesses the knowledge and tools to detect asteroids, track their paths, and, one day, deflect them if needed. Our awareness gives us a chance that no species before us ever had, the ability to prevent a catastrophe that once reshaped life on Earth. The asteroid in our story is a reminder of the stakes, a warning written in stone and fire. Yet it is also a reminder of how precious life is. Earth has rebuilt itself time and again. Life has endured through extinction after extinction, always finding a way to rise. The story of the asteroid teaches us gratitude, for the delicate balance that sustains life, for the resilience that allowed it to return, and for the astonishing chance circumstances that made humans possible. We walk upon ground shaped by ancient tragedy. We breathe air filtered by millions of years of recovery. We think with minds evolution honed in the aftermath of chaos. The asteroid's impact is not just history, it is part of our identity. And as we look back on the fall of the dinosaurs, on the darkness that once swallowed the world, we realize that catastrophe and creation are intertwined. Out of destruction came opportunity. Out of death came life. And out of the end of one age came the beginning of another. We are the heirs of that new age, and our story continues because of a moment when the sky fell. In the final reflections of this ancient saga, the story of the dinosaurs does not end with their ashes nor with the darkness that swallowed their world. Their ending, tragic as it was, extends far beyond their extinction. It is not simply a tale of destruction, but a lens through which we understand our own place in the world, our fragility, our luck, our responsibility, and the deep interconnectedness of life across time. The dinosaurs' disappearance rewrote the arc of evolution, reshaped entire ecosystems, and carved the path that would one day lead to the rise of humanity. Their end matters because it continues to influence life today, echoing across millions of years with lessons that reach every corner of our existence. The dinosaurs were not just creatures of the past, they were a world. They shaped the Earth for over 150 million years. They defined landscapes, sculpted ecosystems, and developed sophisticated behaviors long before humans emerged. They survived multiple environmental changes, continental shifts, volcanic eruptions, and climate fluctuations. They were resilient, adaptable, powerful. Their reign was not a coincidence, it was a testament to evolution's brilliance. And yet, even they were vulnerable to forces beyond their understanding and control. Their end began not with weakness, but with randomness, an asteroid that happened to cross Earth's path at the worst possible angle, at the worst possible time, striking exactly where it would cause the most damage. This randomness is part of why their end matters so much. It humbles us. It reminds us that life, no matter how mighty or well adapted, can be overturned by events far outside its domain. The dinosaurs did not fail, they were undone by cosmic chance. And in that realization lies a profound truth: survival is not guaranteed, even for those who rule their world. Yet their extinction was not just an ending, it was also a beginning. From the ashes of their fall emerged entirely new possibilities. It was precisely because the dinosaurs vanished that mammals, small, warm-blooded, often overlooked, rose to prominence. It was because the skies cleared of giant pterosaurs that early birds diversified. It was because ecosystems collapsed and rebuilt that new branches of evolution took shape. The dinosaurs' end created the ecological space that allowed new forms of intelligence, new forms of social behavior, and new forms of life to emerge. Without their extinction, the story of Earth would have unfolded differently. Humanity, in all our complexity and curiosity, might never have existed. Their end also matters because it reveals how connected all life is. The impact that destroyed them affected every environment on the planet: land, sea, and sky. It disrupted food chains, altered climates, shifted landscapes. It created a global event that forced life to adapt or perish. That same interconnectedness exists today. The dinosaurs' extinction is a reminder that the health of ecosystems is not isolated. What affects one region ultimately affects the whole. It shows us that life on Earth thrives or suffers together, bound by delicate threads that cross continents and oceans. As we look deeper into their story, we also discover the emotional weight of their passing. The dinosaurs were not nameless creatures, they were vibrant, diverse beings who lived full lives under ancient suns. They hunted, grazed, nested, fought, protected their young, and shaped the rhythms of their world. Their final days were filled with confusion, fear, and struggle, just as any species would face in the moments before annihilation. Imagining their distress is not simply an act of sympathy, it is a testament to the shared experience of life. All creatures, regardless of era, feel the instinct to survive. All understand fear. All seek shelter, food, and purpose. The dinosaurs' last moments reflect something universal: the will to live, even when the world is collapsing around you. Their extinction also teaches us about resilience. After the impact, the world was shattered. Darkness ruled. Cold suffocated. Hunger claimed nearly all life. Yet some species endured. Those survivors, tiny birds, burrowing mammals, resilient reptiles, carried forward the essence of life through the most hostile chapter Earth had ever faced. They teach us that even in the bleakest circumstances, life persists. It bends, adapts, pauses, transforms, but it does not easily give up. Their survival is a quiet triumph, overshadowed by the loss of dinosaurs but essential to the continuation of the story. In reflecting on the dinosaurs' end, we confront a deeper philosophical truth: endings are not always failures. They are transformations. Every extinction marks a turning point. Every collapse creates room for renewal. The dinosaurs' end was not the end of life, it was the end of an era so that new forms could rise. From this perspective, the asteroid was not simply a destroyer, it was a catalyst, redirecting the flow of evolution toward paths that would eventually lead to beings capable of contemplating the universe itself. And what of us, humanity? What does their end mean for our existence? It means everything. We live because they died. Our intelligence evolved because ecological niches opened. Our ancestors thrived because predators disappeared. Our world, our civilizations, our technologies, all of them rest on the foundation created by an ancient catastrophe. We are, in a sense, the distant aftermath of a falling sky. Because of this, we carry a responsibility the dinosaurs never had. Unlike them, we can understand the cosmos. We can observe the skies, track comets, detect asteroids, and predict potential threats. We can take action to protect our world. The dinosaurs had no warning, no knowledge, no power to change their fate. But we do. Their extinction is not just a cautionary tale, it is a call to awareness. A reminder that Earth is vulnerable and that our survival depends on how seriously we take that vulnerability. Their end matters because it encourages humility. We are not untouchable. We are not permanent. The universe is vast and unpredictable, and our existence is far more delicate than we often believe. Recognizing this makes us wiser and more compassionate stewards of the planet. Their end matters because it inspires curiosity. Fossils, bones, and ancient sediments allow us to peer into a world that existed long before we did. They invite us to imagine creatures that thundered across continents, soared above primeval forests, and swam through ancient seas. The story of dinosaurs ignites wonder, encouraging us to explore, discover, and seek answers. Their end matters because it teaches us about time. The dinosaurs ruled far longer than humans have existed. Their rise, reign, and extinction stretch across scales of time we can barely comprehend. This perspective grounds us. It reminds us that human history is a blink in Earth's story, and that our actions, while powerful, must be guided by awareness of the planet's long-term rhythms. Their end matters because it is a story of scale, of forces so immense, so overwhelming, that they reshape continents and rewrite evolution. Yet it is also a story of intimacy, of individual creatures struggling, surviving, and living their final moments. This contrast between the cosmic and the personal is what makes their extinction one of the most compelling chapters in all of natural history. Finally, their end matters because it reminds us that life is precious. Every species, every ecosystem, every moment is part of a delicate balance shaped by deep time and fragile circumstances. The dinosaurs' disappearance underscores how quickly that balance can shift, and how miraculous it is that life thrives at all. As the last echoes of their world fade, we honor the dinosaurs not simply as extinct creatures, but as ancestors in the grand lineage of life. Their story shaped ours. Their fall made our rise possible. Their existence enriches our understanding of Earth. Their extinction humbles us, guides us, and challenges us to protect the life that remains. When the sky fell, an age ended. But from that ending came everything that followed, including us. Let me know if you'd like me to compile the full script, polish transitions, or convert these sections into a downloadable document.